Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Edina City Council meeting. It is Tuesday, April 2nd, 2024, 7:04 p.m. I think all of you were in the room when Director Benarott talked about how we're doing these meetings on a hybrid sort of basis, all during COVID, and since then we've been doing these meetings in a way where folks could participate remotely, watching the meeting on cable TV or at edinamn.gov live meetings or on facebook.com/edinamn. So they might be listening one of those and watching in one of those three different ways. And this evening we've got two opportunities for people that are remote to participate. One is during community comment, and we have one public hearing matter this evening as well. Community comment will come up fairly quickly. I'm going to show that number on the screen. Have the staff show that number.
You won't see it in here, sir, but they are displaying it.
All right, okay, very good. So there's a call-in number, and then there's an access code and a password. And if you're calling in with regard to community comment, or you listen to Director Benarott here in the chambers, you can address the council about any concern that you have, other than something that's on the agenda this evening or scheduled for a future public hearing. Otherwise, we're willing to hear what your concerns might be, whether you are live or remote. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we have one public hearing matter. So having provided that information, I'm going to call the meeting to order, and I'm going to ask our clerk, Sharon Allison, to call the roll.
Councilmember Agnew.
Here.
Councilmember Jackson.
Here.
Councilmember Pierce.
Here.
Councilmember Risser. Mayor Hovland.
Here. So with respect to Member Risser, as soon as we get this technology issue solved, she's going to be participating in the meeting by video conferencing because she's been advised by a healthcare professional against being in a public place for medical reasons. So we're able to accomplish this by video conferencing, and we'll have her with us hopefully during the entirety of the meeting. We've called the roll, and the next thing is for all of us is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join us.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thanks, everybody. Next, we have a meeting agenda, and if you listen to Director Benarott, she said that we had received a call from one of the applicants this evening that was involved in the public hearing process and asked that their matter be pulled from the City Council agenda. So that is item 8A. And I think what we'll do is approve the meeting agenda in its amended form, eliminating item 8A. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Second.
Member Jackson moves. Member Pierce seconds the adoption of the meeting agenda in its amended form, eliminating item 8A. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adopting? Yes, Member Teague. Director Teague.
The official action, if you wouldn't mind, would be to continue that public hearing into the April 16th City Council meeting.
All right, let's do that. Let's approve the, I'll do it in kind of a double motion here. We'll approve the meeting agenda in its amended form, eliminating item 8A and continuing item 8A to the meeting on the 16th of April, 2024. All right, Member Jackson moves.
I will make an amended motion to that effect.
All right, Member Pierce.
And I second the amended
All right.
motion.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the amended motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Oh, good. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry, because Councilmember Risser is joining virtually. All the roll calls, it must be done by voice
Yeah,
vote.
thank you for that.
Or roll call,
Thanks
I
for that
should say.
reminder. So because Member Risser's remote, we're going to have to do this by roll call. Member Jackson, yay or nay?
Yay.
Member Pierce?
Yay.
Member Agnew?
Yay.
Member Risser?
Yay.
Mayor, yay. The motion passes. All right, next we are at community comment. So if folks are in the audience that wish to address the council on a matter of concern to them that's not on the agenda this evening or scheduled for a future public hearing, feel free to come forward. As Director Benarott told you, you'll have 3 minutes. You'll get a yellow sort of cautionary signal. It's like a traffic semaphore when you've got 30 seconds left, and then you should be thinking about winding up your comments so we treat everybody the same way here at City Hall. And welcome.
Hello, Andy Brown, 5512 Park Place in Edina. I just wanted to draw the council and staff's attention to the latest article in the Star and Tribune regarding Wings Financial foreclosing on a portion of Normandale Lakes Office Park. They did not pay $40.3 million in unpaid mortgages for Class A office space. So I'm really concerned about the business premise for what we're doing on France Avenue with Mr. Carlson and Tiff, given that that's such a prominent piece of office space that is now in foreclosure, and they're foreclosing on it. The second thing I'm really concerned about is Lewis Park. I know we finally got that warming house in the CIP, but the lights at the park are as old as I am. I don't see any progress, whether it's with the council or the park board or planning for that, and how that is going to occur. It's a valuable asset. It's a valuable asset to hockey, to soccer, to the entire community as a whole. And I just don't see our focus on that. I see our focus on other things. So thank you.
Yeah, very good. Thanks for those two items. Anyone else in the audience wish to address council on a matter of concern to them that's not on the agenda this evening or scheduled for a future public hearing? All right, let's turn to the virtual world and see if we have anybody with us.
I have no one on the line, sir.
All right. As is our practice, when we have folks in our community that have come for community comment at a prior meeting, we address those issues both on the city website on the Friday following the meeting, and then we also have a report by our city manager on those follow-up items. And tonight we've got our assistant city manager, Ari Lenz, with us this evening. And pleased to have you here, Ms. Lenz, and I'll let you give the report to the city manager's response to community comments that were made in the at the prior meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. We did receive several questions at the last meeting. Several of those questions related to trees and emerald ash borer. Staff put together a wonderful response with links to the requested materials on the city's website that you can find in the page that you just mentioned, Mr. Mayor. I encourage residents to take a peek at that information that is provided because there's a lot of detail there and a lot of really great resources. We also had a question regarding if the city would assist in stopping the spread of purple loosestrife from the local water bodies. The control falls under our land management program, and the city has been investing in our natural areas restoration since the adoption of the park strategic plan in 2015. More information and links on the available resources regarding that are also available on that same webpage. There were also some questions regarding evaluating the phragmite reeds at Pamela Park and whether they were native or invasive species. Staff followed up with the commenter and verified the locations that they had in the field. A follow-up visit will be required later this year during the actual growing season just to confirm that they are actually non-native. And staff is planning to control all known non-native phragmites in 2024. And that is the end of the comments that I have.
Very good. Thank you. Ms. Lenz, that prompt any questions from council members for Ms. Lenz? All right, very good. We've got next the consent agenda. There are several items on the consent agenda. I know Member Agnew wanted to remove item 6G for further discussion. Were there any other items on the consent agenda that any council member wished to remove for purposes of discussion? All right. Then with the exception of item 6G, is there a motion to approve the balance of the items on the consent agenda in a single motion?
So moved.
Second?
Member Jackson moves, Member Agnew seconds the adoption of the items on the consent agenda in a single motion with the exception of item 6G. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the motions? Oh, thank you. Boy, you get in the groove, don't you? After a few years of doing this. Roll call, please. All right. Member Jackson.
Aye.
Member Pierce.
Aye.
Member Agnew.
Aye.
Member Resser.
Aye.
Mayor Hovland, aye. All right. The consent agenda items are adopted with the exception of item 6G. I might get the next one right here. We're going to move on now to item 6G, and that is a request for purchase. As many of you know in the audience, we've been talking about doing a small area plan study in that Londonderry and Lincoln Drive area off 169. And there's a recommendation on professional services to help guide that work of the Planning Commission and other members of our community. And Member Agnew wanted to discuss that a little bit at our meeting and find out a little bit more about the selection process. So I'm going to turn now to Member Agnew for her thoughts.
Thank you. Having been a fellow planning commission member in the past and having worked on a district plan, I was really curious to just learn more about the selection process and how the work group landed on this recommended provider of services. So I would just like to give them the opportunity, if we're open to it, for them to share a little bit more about that process and what it specifically was about this organization, this partner that we'll be working with that they were excited about.
Good. Director Teague, you want to, any initial comment before we have?
Yes, we had 3 excellent candidates, and they were interviewed by our 3 co-chairs for the project, as well as city staff. And the co-chairs are here, Lou Miranda and Meriwether Felt, and they are willing to provide some of their, what went into the decision in hiring MEND Collaborative.
All right, commissioners, welcome. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I say your name?
Go ahead. Commissioner Felt, go ahead.
I'm Mary Weatherfelt. I live at 4116 Grimes Avenue South.
Commissioner?
Oh, do you?
Yeah, you should go ahead and introduce yourself too. Why don't you go ahead?
I'm Lou Miranda. I'm Vice Chair of the Planning Commission and Co-Chair of this committee.
And we all pulled in 3 candidates to interview for this
Would you pull that
process.
microphone a little bit closer, please, Commissioner?
We pulled in 3 candidates to interview with us, and they were all like high-quality candidates. And that was a very good process. It was good for me to go through because I had my initial thoughts and, revised them during the process. However, at the end of that, we all 3 of us, there was one more commission member that's a co-chair, quickly agreed that there were top 2. And after our meeting, we discussed in a lot of detail what we thought, and it came down to, for me, how they answered the questions. And we had 7 questions that we asked of them, one of which was, how would they react to, or how has one of their projects changed over the course of the project, based on the information that they came in? And I felt their answer to that was, they talked about a situation where they had to go back, not only they had to go back to the city, and they had to go back to the public, and they had to kind of revise their whole kind of goals. And it seemed like it came up with a solution that both the city and the community really appreciated. And I thought that was a really creative approach, and I thought they did it thoughtfully, and I think because of this Lincoln Londonderry project, and that it is not an easy site, and there's going to be a lot of differing opinions, I thought that they would deal with that situation well, not only with us, but with the community and with themselves. And the other question that I really liked their approach to was one of our last questions, if we had time, was we wanted them to list several core values of their company. And that came up in their name itself. There were others, but MEND Collaborative is all about bringing together a lot of pieces and knitting it together. So I thought they came out on top.
Good, thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner Miranda, thoughts?
Yeah, sure. So we had 8 or 9 applications from consulting companies, and we picked the top 3, and we had a pretty easy time picking the top 3. We got a lot of really good recommendations, or a lot of good consulting proposals. I was with Councilmember Agnew on the 70th and Cahill, or Greater Cahill plan. And the 3 that we chose to interview were, like I said, all excellent. And we agreed that there were two top candidates. All three of the co-chairs agreed that there were two top candidates. And so it was just a matter of deciding between those two candidates. And from my perspective, the top consulting company the second company was very good, and if they were the only company that was around, we would have chosen them easily. But the top company really had a different way of looking at things and were a lot more comprehensive, and they had experience which the other consultants didn't have. And they brought something, I thought, a completely new attitude to the table that we didn't really see with the other one. And I mean, one of the co-owners of the company is a lecturer at the University of Minnesota. So, and he deals with conflict resolution. So knowing how earnest my fellow residents are, I thought that would be a good thing to have. So they really, to me, they really knocked it out of the park.
All right, good. Thank you, Commissioner. Does that prompt any questions from council members for commissioners? Any follow-on, Member Agnew?
No, I really appreciate it and learning more about the thought process that the Planning Commission went under. And with that, and seeing no other questions, I'll move to approve this item from the agenda, which is...
Thank you. Commissioner Agnew moves the approval of the contract with Men Collaborative for $124,920 for completion of the Lincoln and Londonderry small area plan work in conjunction with the Planning Commission. Is there a second?
Second.
Member Jackson seconds Member Agnew's motion as stated. Any further discussion? Roll call, please. I'll call it. Member Jackson.
Aye.
Pierce.
Aye.
Member Agnew.
Aye.
Member Risser.
Aye.
Mayor Hovland, aye. All right, carried unanimously. Item 6G is approved. Very good. We're going to move on now to special recognitions and presentations. We've got two really important parts of that section of the agenda this evening dealing with public safety. And our Police Chief, Todd Milburn, is going to reverse the order a little bit on the presentations, and I'm going to turn it now to Chief Milburn with regard to these particular awards. Chief, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. Appreciate being here. Chief Milburn with the Police Department. And for Council and for our community, Council obviously recalls that about a month ago we held our first ever public safety banquet event where we had this great opportunity to really celebrate the great work that our public safety staff get involved in. So we handed off a number of awards. It was a really good event. We had a really good turnout, and it was just a fun night for everyone that was involved. And also part of that, we were able to identify our Officer of the Year, Firefighter of the Year, and we also added a new award, which is our Employee of the Year. And so those three awards were handed out that night as well. And we thought it was very important to continue the tradition here in front of Council and also carry that night over into tonight's Council meeting so that we can also call out and identify the great work and obviously identify our Employee and Officer of the Year award as well here tonight. So that's what tonight is about. I will note that the Fire Officer of the Year will be coming later. We just couldn't get all of our staff together on one night, so that's coming to you a little bit later on this month here. So first up, our first Employee of the Year is Kim Tubbs, and a quick little background about her, and I'll read off the bio that we also did that night. The Public Safety Employee of the Year Award is a newly created award that will be presented annually to a non-sworn employee of either the Police Department or Fire Department who has exemplified organizational values, ideals, and dedication to serving the citizens of Edina. Thank you to the Edina Crime Fund for their support in making this award possible. The first recipient of the Public Safety Employee of the Year Award is Kimberly Tubbs. Kimberly rejoined the Edina Police Department in July of 2020 as a records specialist, after previously working for the department from 2009 to 2011 as a 911 dispatcher. The records division of the Edina Police Department had a challenging 2023, but Kim went the extra mile whenever possible. In February 2023, the department implemented a new software system for dispatch, mobile users for officers and firefighters, and records. Kim was asked to be the trainer for the support staff team. The position required attending multiple meetings and training sessions in order to best prepare the support staff team for this significant change. This was just the beginning of a multi-step process that lasted the majority of 2023. Kim utilized her training to teach each support member their specific duties while also assisting many other members of the police department to understand the new system. Halfway through 2023, another support staff member resigned, leaving behind a list of responsibilities that had been assigned to that individual. Kim took on a large portion of these duties while simultaneously being instrumental in finding a replacement for that position. This was a longer than standard hiring process, but once hired, Kim became the primary trainer for that new employee. As the end of 2023 approached, the police department experienced back-to-back homicides, which is a rarity for this department and its community. This created a significant workload increase for the entire department, but Kim did not hesitate to jump in and help out even on her days off. Working in an unpredictable environment, Kim took on all these extra tasks while continuing to manage her day-to-day workload. Despite all the challenges in 2023 presented, Kim continued to show up early with a smile on her face and a positive and very welcoming energy. Kim's dedication to the advancements of the department, her positive disposition, and her willingness to help with any challenge presented demonstrates why she's deserving of the Public Safety Employee of the Year Award for 2023. And with that, would you please join me in congratulating Kim for being our first ever recipient of the Police Employee of the Year. Kim's got a couple comments that she wants to say, so if you're okay with that, Council will do that, and then we'll do the picture. Okay.
I'll be short and sweet, I promise. I just want to thank you all for being here and letting us be recognized in this way. I appreciate you taking a moment to do that. I'm very honored and quite humbled to receive this award. I'm also one of the lucky ones who is surrounded by the best at the Edina Police Department. When I initially left here in 2011, after working as a dispatcher, as Chief Milburn stated, I knew if I ever had the chance to return that I would. The reason was simple. I love the work. I love the people I worked with. This work had meaning to me. Now that I'm back and have been here for almost 4 years, I'm happy to report that none of those things have changed. What really makes me most happy about this award is that it shines a light on those who work so diligently, kind of behind the scenes, who may not always get the accolades. The work, I always tell people, it's not flashy, but it's important. And it still brings me so much fulfillment every single day. As the first recipient of this award, I do hope this recognition continues for people like me. There are plenty of worthy candidates that I get to share my days with. Edina has a dedicated group of non-sworn employees in the police and fire departments that include record specialists, dispatchers, administrative assistants, administrative support professionals, office manager, my supervisor, Lynn Olson, who's here tonight, and also an evidence technician. And they show up every day and put in the work, just like I do. So I really look forward to being over there in the chairs next year, cheering on whoever is next year's winner, or recipient, excuse me. I want to thank the Edina Crime Fund for providing this opportunity, and I'm grateful for this recognition. I also want to thank Chief Milburn, Deputy Chief White, and again, my supervisor, Office Manager Lynn Olson, and my whole team that I work with every day. Thank you very much.
Sergeant Cizik, if you could join me up here. Next up, our Officer of the Year Award. The Crime Prevention Fund has presented an award called the Mike Satari Award for Officer of the Year, and this has been an annual thing since 2011. And this is to recognize exceptional officers deserving of special recognition. The award is named after Mike Satari, who served as police chief from 1999 to 2009 during his 31-year tenure here with the Edina Police Department. This award is presented annually, recognizing officers who have gone above and beyond the call of duty on the job. Thank you to the Edina Crime Prevention Fund for their support in making this award possible. The 14th recipient of the Officer of the Year Award is Darren Cizik. Darren joined the Edina Police Department in March of 2003. During his time at the Edina Police Department, Darren spent time on the Drug Task Force, the Traffic Unit, and had a brief period in the Investigative Division. He also served as a motor officer, a field training officer, as well as a SWAT operator and a SWAT sniper. Darren was promoted to the rank of sergeant in July 2020 and currently assists in overseeing the Investigative Division. During Sergeant Cizik's 17 years on the SWAT team, Darren was involved in 136 callouts, some of which included responding to barricaded suspects with hostages or a hostage involved in a home invasion. Located that suspect that had been involved in an officer-involved shooting and assisted with providing protective services to the Dalai Lama and multiple civil disturbances that occurred in 2020 and in 2021. Darren was active in acquiring more improved sniper rifles for the SWAT team and assisted in the acquisition of a new Bearcat armored vehicle. These tools added much-needed protection to the SWAT team and the public and will be utilized to keep officers and citizens safe for many years to come. Over the course of his career with the Edina Police Department, Sergeant Cizik has demonstrated numerous examples of his leadership, service, and commitment to the safety and well-being of his partners and citizens of Edina. His exceptional performance and valor were particularly evident during two critical incidents at Celto Mall in 2023. On April 5th, 2023, well, there's a lot of 03s and 23s, so we're getting through them. While working off duty at the Apple Store, Sergeant Cizik's preparedness and instinctual response were unmistakable as he heard multiple gunshots within the mall. With the safety of the public as his priority, he acted decisively to initiate a lockdown of Apple and immediately proceeded towards the sound of gunshots. He provided critical updates that were clear and concise in the radio while he approached the source of the gunfire to neutralize the threat and assist any victims. Similarly, on January 9, 2023, upon hearing a gunshot inside the mall, Sergeant Cizik again locked down Apple Store and the mall while running towards the gunshot to investigate the situation. Sergeant Cizik's tactics and calm demeanor, along with his ability to coordinate resources and manage the scenes, were exemplary examples of his tactical and leadership abilities. As Sergeant Cizik transitioned to supervising the investigative division, he oversaw the background investigation process. In 2023, Sergeant Cizik managed 40 background checks for various positions within the agency, which have been crucial for staffing at the police department effectively. We probably added another 15 in the last couple of weeks here too, so that number has grown. Sergeant Cizik distinguished conduct during times of crisis, alongside his diligent work in administrative task roles, set him apart as he is truly deserving of this distinguished award. Would you please join me in congratulating Sergeant Darren Cizik as the 2023 Mike Satari Officer of the Year Award. Darren's got a couple words to say.
I am going to put this down as my hands are a little sweaty, so I apologize. Mr. Mayor, City Council members, Assistant City Manager Lenz, fellow officers and dispatchers, I am deeply honored and humbled to accept the 2023 Mike Satari Officer of the Year Award. This recognition is not just a reflection of my individual efforts, but a testament to the dedication and commitment of our law enforcement community. First and foremost, I want to express my sincere gratitude to the Edina Crime Prevention Fund for this incredible honor. It is truly humbling to be recognized amongst such exemplary colleagues, many of whom I deeply admire and respect. I must also extend my heartfelt thanks to my fellow officers and partners. As we know, policing is a team effort. I am constantly inspired by your bravery, professionalism, and unwavering commitment to serving and protecting this community. Each day we face challenges together, and it is through our collective strength that we are able to make a difference in the lives of those we serve. I am also very grateful for the support of my family and loved ones who are with me tonight. My mother, Felicia, my father, Michael, my wife Marcia, children Michaela and Brianna. They have stood by me through the long hours, the sacrifices, and the challenges that come with this profession. Their love, understanding, and encouragement have sustained me through difficult times and fueled my passion to be the best that I can be. To the community we serve, I am profoundly grateful for your trust and support. Your partnership is vital to our success, and it is an honor to work alongside you to build a safer and stronger community. As I stand here tonight, I am reminded of the responsibility that comes with this award. It is a reminder of the importance of upholding the values of integrity, professionalism, and compassion in everything we do. I am committed to continuing to lead by example, to inspire my colleagues, and to make a positive impact in the lives of those we serve. In closing, I want to dedicate this award to all the men and the women in uniform who selflessly serve and protect this community every day. Your bravery, sacrifice, and dedication do not go unnoticed, and I am proud to stand among you. Thank you once again for this incredible honor.
Just a couple more. The lighting in this room is terrible for this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor and council members, next up, we're going to do our National Public Safety Telecommunicators Week proclamation. So for that, I'm going to have our dispatch supervisor, Janelle Harris, step up here and then let you read off the proclamation, and then she'll have a couple words after that.
All right, thank you, Chief. We're going to stick with this public safety, public service theme here. So,
As well.
Janelle, welcome.
Thank you.
So, folks, this is Janelle Harris, our dispatch supervisor, here to accept the proclamation, and that is National Public Safety Telecommunicator Week, Sunday, April 14, 2024, through Saturday, April 20, 2024, and the proclamation reads as follows. Whereas emergencies can occur at any time that require police, fire, or emergency medical services, and whereas when an emergency occurs, the prompt response of police officers, firefighters, and paramedics is critical to the protection of life and preservation of property. And whereas the safety of our police officers, firefighters, and paramedics is dependent upon the quality and accuracy of information obtained from citizens who telephone or text the Edina Communications Center. And whereas public safety telecommunicators are the first and most critical contact our citizens have with emergency services. And whereas public safety telecommunicators are the single vital link for our police officers, firefighters, and paramedics by monitoring their activities by radio, providing them information, and ensuring their safety. And whereas public safety telecommunicators of the Edina Telecommunications Center have contributed substantially to the apprehension of the criminals, suppression of fires, and treatment of patients. And whereas each public safety telecommunicator has exhibited compassion, understanding, and professionalism during the performance of their job in the past year. Now, therefore, the City Council of the City of Edina does hereby proclaim the week of April 14th through April 20, 2024 as National Public Safety Telecommunicator Week in the City of Edina in honor of the men and women whose diligence and professionalism keep our city and our citizens safe. Is there a motion to adopt the proclamation?
So moved.
Second.
Member Jackson moves. Member Pierce seconds the adoption of the proclamation designating Sunday, April 14, 2024 through Saturday, April 2024 as National Public Safety Telecommunicator Week. Any further discussion with respect to the proclamation? Member Jackson.
Aye.
Member Pierce.
Aye.
Member Agnew.
Aye.
Member Risser.
Aye.
Mr. Mayor. Aye. Proclamation's adopted. Thank you. Thanks for being with us. I know you'll have some really important things to tell us. So thank you.
Well, I hope so. Thank you. So thank you, Mayor Hovland, council members, Assistant City Manager Lenz. As supervisor of the 911 Dispatch Center, I would like to thank you for recognizing the work of our 911 dispatchers who will soon be celebrating National Public Safety Telecommunicators Week. Edina's public safety telecommunicators, also known as 911 dispatchers, are uniquely selfless people with a desire to serve and improve this community. Citizens rely on the dispatchers to answer their calls and make a difference in their very worst moments. Police, fire, and medical responders rely on the dispatchers to provide accurate and timely information by radio while always knowing their location and status to help keep them safe. All of this and this exceptional staff we have here rises to that challenge each and every time. So to paint a picture of a typical shift, our 911 center will staff 2 to 3 dispatchers at a time who work at consoles composed of 5 monitors, fed from 4 computers, and running more than 10 software systems at any one time. The person sitting at the controls must know how to operate all the numerous technology networks, an elaborate multi-line telephone system, a statewide shared radio system, a local computer-aided dispatch system, and multiple record management systems along with dozens of auxiliary components. In our highly technical environment, not one of these systems stays the same for very long, so that definitely makes our dispatchers skilled change agents as well. This past year, our 911 dispatchers, who are often recognized as the first responders, received over 112,000 emergent and non-emergent calls for service. So that's about a little bit over 300 calls a day that they're fielding, 2 at a time. These calls fall in the range of accidental misdials all the way to the most serious of emergencies, like robberies, structure fires, and cardiac arrests. The city of Edina employs some of the most dedicated and professional public safety telecommunicators in the entire state of Minnesota. When you have an opportunity to observe their daily work, or even as you live and work in the community, it is so easy to take for granted the quality, speed, and creativity of the decision-making and collaboration used to reach extraordinary accomplishments in their daily work. When they seem like just a voice on the line, it's easy to forget the challenges of physical and emotional stressors they encounter in the heroic work that they perform as they protect community members' public safety and property. They complete their work with no thoughts of glory or praise other than the knowledge that they have helped someone in their hour of need. That is why it is so important that we take this time and honor them during National Public Safety Telecommunicators Week. I am so proud of their dedication, their compassion, and service, and I am grateful for this leadership's recognition of these same qualities. There are easier jobs, but to our public safety telecommunicators, it isn't just a job, it is a true calling to their lives. So on behalf of all the dispatchers, thank you. Thank you again for this meaningful recognition.
All right, folks, let's give our telecommunicators a round of applause. About a month or so ago, we had 20 kids here from France that were changing with the French immersion program. And they got to go to the dispatch center. That was really, I think that was probably the highlight for them, to be able to go to the dispatch center and see the work that you do there. You were pretty agog there. I saw a lot of jaws hanging open as you were doing your work. So thank you. That completes the, it does complete the special recognitions and presentations portion of the agenda. We're going to move on now to the public hearing portion of the agenda, and as you heard us discuss earlier, we've got one of those matters continued to the 16th of April meeting, and the only other matter we have tonight is a public hearing involving something that's been before the Planning Commission, and that's a discussion about something called ADUs, a new acronym all of you might be learning about here, accessory dwelling units. And as we all work on this issue of the challenge of global housing and affordable housing on a global basis, our city is working on this as well, and this is one of the thoughts our Planning Commission has come up with. And we've got our Community Development Coordinator, Addison Lewis, with us this evening, as well as one of our Planning Commissioners, Quincy Smith, who's going to make the presentation. And so I'm going to turn it now to you, Mr. Lewis and Commissioner Smith, to introduce the topic and tell us what you're thinking about and what the Planning Commission did.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and Council. So this item is to hold a public hearing tonight for consideration of an ordinance regarding accessory dwelling units. I'm just going to give a brief introduction to the topic here, some background on how we got here, and then hand it over to Commissioner Smith to talk about, go through the details of the ordinance and talk a bit about how the Planning Commission thought about all those elements. So ADUs have been identified in a number of the city's guiding documents as a way to meet various housing and sustainability goals. Those documents being the Comprehensive Plan, Climate Action Plan, and Housing Strategy Task Force Report. Really, a lot of those goals talk about providing more variety in housing options and flexibility to our households to kind of meet the needs of their household, whether that's housing for an adult child or a caretaker or an elderly parent. The goal behind this is really just providing more options and flexibility to those families. So given that this was a topic that was popping up on in a number of our guiding documents, it was included on the Planning Commission's 2022 and 2023 work plans. And so a subcommittee of the Planning Commission and staff began conducting research on ADUs back in May of 2022, and that included reviewing the ordinances of over 20 plus other communities, as well as meeting with other departments here at City Hall to see how ADUs might impact other departments as well. So with that information then, the Planning Commission prepared an advisory communication that was presented to the City Council on February 7th, 2023, recommending that we move forward with developing an ordinance to allow accessory dwelling units. It was at that meeting that we really talked a lot about the benefits of ADUs and the why behind this. And then that discussion continued with council at a work session on May 16th, 23. And it was at that meeting that council provided feedback to staff and the commission to continue developing recommendations for ADUs, but also to get some feedback from the community. And so we held a survey that was on Better Together for about 6 weeks during the summer last year. We received 136 responses to that, and we promoted that in a number of ways. Commissioner Smith wrote an article that was in the Edina Sun Current, and then with the help of Director Benarat's department, we had a couple of different video promotions. You see the image here of one of the interviews that Commissioner Smith did. And then we held a couple of resident focus groups to have kind of deeper conversations with residents about their thoughts on accessory dwelling units. And so the commission took all of this feedback and information and held 4 work sessions on the dates you see here and began developing the framework for the ordinance that's before you tonight. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Commissioner Smith to talk about the commission's approach and walk you through the ordinance.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Welcome, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Quincy Smith, Edina Planning Commission. So as Addison shared, this was a very extensive process. And so what I hope to do this evening is just walk you through some of our thinking, our process of how we came to the different elements. But first off, the approach that we took was one where we truly wanted to promote flexibility, right? We think about residents and their unique needs. And so we wanted to make sure that whatever we came up with had some flexibility built in so that it could adjust and meet the needs from any household. We certainly wanted to minimize the need for variances as much as we could get residents to follow the ordinance and push that through and develop ADUs on their property. Certainly if there's variances that come back, we would consider those. But we wanted to do it in such a way that it could minimize that. One of the topics that came up quite strongly in some of the survey feedback was the need for preventing corporate ownership, meaning that someone's going to buy up Edina property and convert all of them into rental units. And so we wanted to pay attention to that as well. City values, city concerns, as Addison talks about, it's in many of our guiding documents. And transparency, right? So we did a lot of public forums, we wrote articles, we did videos. It was on so much different forums that we wanted to get the word out that we were working on this. So with that being said, I'll start walking through some of the key elements in the ordinance and hopefully give you a sense of how we were thinking about it. So the first item here was on the location. We wanted to make sure that ADUs were built in for more R1 type districts and for single family homes. One thing that came up quite a bit was an R1 could also involve a church. But we didn't want to include churches within the ordinance because we think that would change the character of the neighborhood significantly. So we kept it to only single family homes. And that was kind of the thinking behind that. The other element here was on the number. So again, we wanted to make sure that we safeguard the single family neighborhood dynamic. And so we didn't want to have multiple ADUs on one property. And so one ADU per property was the limit that we thought made sense. And this also extends and is reflective in the other cities, in our neighboring cities that also have just one ADU per property. The next element here is on the type. Now, ADUs could be certainly something where it's internal to the primary structure. It could be attached or detached. And so when you think about the different configurations of properties across Edina, we want it to be as flexible as possible. So depending on your family's needs, your housing design and configuration, you should be able to decide on which option works best for you. We know that some neighboring cities, like in Richfield, for example, only allow detached ADUs, and so that limits options for residents, but we didn't want to do that here in the city of Edina. Next, it was permitting. So here's where we were really thinking really critically about, should we make ADUs something that is by right or through a conditional use permit? And we just believe that if we wrote the ordinance correctly and residents followed the ordinance how we design it, then they should be able to build one and give them full control over the building process. Once we introduce the idea of a conditional use permit, it certainly adds some more complexity to the process, and we didn't want to have that. Again, we're maximizing the value for residents and their rights to build and design homes that suits their family's needs. Next, it was on the occupancy. This was a really interesting question that came up. We wanted to think about, how do we position it and prioritize homes for families and not investors? And this is a very family-friendly ordinance. Folks have a lot of diverse needs, and we wanted to keep it that way. And so we decided that one ADU can be rented out, but not both. And so that would essentially, hopefully, blunt the need for investor-type banks to come in and buy up properties and rent out both units. I know that there are some residents and some of the feedback, folks said, well, why can't we rent out both of them? And I think we wanted to take an incremental approach by starting off with, let's just rent one of them, but not both, and see where that takes us, because we want to incentivize this for families more so than for investors. The next element was around ownership. And so again, the idea of preserving the neighborhood interests in Edina was important. The second, we start dividing up properties and selling off part of the property for an ADU and keeping the other side, it really changes the dynamics of the neighborhood. And so we wanted to make sure and keep the position that we can't sell them independently, and it all is one in one contained unit. The next item here is on the size. This was a size and max size and minimum size. This was a very debated item. From a max size perspective, our current existing ordinance has a max size for detached structures at 1,000 square feet. So when we did some research on that, and we asked ourselves, what's a reasonable amount of space that could be built for a family? 1,000 square feet would make that happen. And so we wanted to stay consistent as possible with what the current ordinance say. And so 1,000 square feet was what we decided was the maximum size for an ADU. Now, the question did come up of if you have your basement, you wanted to convert your basement into an ADU. And if your basement is 2,000 square feet, what do you do? Do you chop up your basement into small sections? And so here's where we did put in the provision that if your basement could all be converted into an ADU, you should be able to do that, even if it goes above the max size. Because we didn't want to have residents pay and spend extra dollars really retrofitting their basements to just minimize it to meet the maximum size here. So we said, you know what? Again, something that could create some flexibility and reduce costs, your basement could be converted into an ADU. The other element was on the minimum size. And so this, again, was a very hotly debated item. When we look at the city of Edina, if you push into the Morningside neighborhood, there's really smaller properties there. But as you go more westward, the properties get a lot bigger. And so if we had a minimum size, then it might disadvantage the folks who live in the Morningside or folks who have smaller lot sizes and be more favorable to folks who have larger properties. And we wanted this to be for all of Edina. And so we said, you know what, we trust the residents here to design and build structures that meet their families' needs. And so we removed the minimum size requirement in this ordinance. And so we truly wanted residents to decide what your configuration, your property looks like, and build an ADU that meets your family's needs. From a design perspective, we certainly wanted to maintain the appearance of a single-family home. I think in some of the previous meetings that we've had with City Council, that was a big point, that we didn't want to change the character of the neighborhood. And so we were thinking really deeply about this, and we decided that the ADU should be a step behind the primary dwelling. In that way, if you were to drive down the street, you would not even know, right? It would be in your property, behind your property line. You wouldn't even notice that an ADU is there. So the character of the neighborhood would essentially stay the same. Now, we do know that some residents have garages, for example, at the side of their house at the same property front line, and we know that that's not going to work so well for those kind of families and those kind of configurations. So, we'd be very open to looking at it through a variance. Bring your case forward and we take a look at that. But we think over 90% or so of Edina residents should be able to take advantage of that in the city. Next is on construction. And the big topic on construction were how do you convert a shed? A lot of sheds sit on slabs of concrete. So then the question came up was, should it be on frost footing? Should we not be on frost fittings? What does that even mean? Could I convert my shed? Is this going to be an extra cost for me? And so initially in the first drafting of the code, we did put in some requirements that it should be on a frost footing type of a structure. But when we thought about it some more, that would truly limit and add additional cost to residents. And we said, we shouldn't be in the business of that. Let's just have residents follow Minnesota building code, because there could be some innovations in the future where even if your shed is on a slab, it could still probably work as a well-functioning living unit. And so we decided to take that out and point residents to Minnesota building code instead. In addition to that, we did put in some guidelines essentially in the code where if you were to connect to water and sewer, it would be preferable that you connect to the main water and sewer of the primary residence in a way to prevent digging up, into the main sewer and water lines. The more you do that, essentially, it creates opportunities for leakage. And so we want to have residents work with city engineers to, preferably connect to the main water and sewer lines of the primary residence. But if for some reason you have old pipes, old sewer pipes, etc., then that could be considered to connect into the main sewer and water lines. We're just trying to protect the city from more maintenance down the road if we could avoid it. Parking. I know parking was something that we've looked at quite a bit. In this code, we did not want to have additional requirements for parking. We know that for a home to be developed here in Edina, it should have at least one covered parking spot. And so if you build an ADU, we would leave it up to residents to decide where that car, if that person who's going to be living there has a car, would go. The only requirement is that we don't want cars on the street because that's part of our code, and we want to maintain that. So we didn't want to add additional requirements to build a new garage to hold a new vehicle, because you may or may not even need that. So we didn't have that requirement in this code as well, which again gives that flexibility to residents. The last element here is on setbacks and height. And so this was a very complicated topic to go through, so we had to come up with a framework of how to think about this. And so we wanted to think about this from a couple of perspectives, right? We know that in the city of Edina, there are residents who have non-conforming structures that exist, something that's much closer to the rear and side lot lines. And so we don't want to incentivize adding more to a non-conforming structure. We wanted to, promote conforming structures. And so we had to think through, if you have a shed, for example, that you wanted to convert into an ADU, once it meets the rear and side lot line setbacks, you should be able to use and convert that. Our next component was roof lines. And so in the city of Edina, we measure the height of a roof from floor to the top of the roof. And sometimes if you have like a very vaulted roof, there's not enough headspace. And so we wanted to think through what does a 1.5 story look like? So we allowed it to go up to 18 feet. And so that's kind of part of the components that you see there. And then a few other key points is that if folks are very used to seeing a structure in their yard today, having someone move into that, live into that, may not be a big of a change. And so we wanted to really think about how do we make folks leverage what they already have and build upon that if they wanted to. And so that's kind of how we came up with some of these key height and setbacks. And then the final point is that you might want to go up 2 stories, for example. We thought that moving it away from the rear lot lines about at least 12 feet would make sense, so it's not superimposing on the neighbors' properties. And so those are some of the considerations that we see here, and these are just some of the drawings that we use to help kind of give folks a sense of what it would look like. These would be more of the narrow lots that you see, that's 50 feet wide. So this might be more akin to these Morningside type neighborhoods. And if we have more traditional West Edina type property size, you could see here, if you want to go up to 2 stories, we want to make sure that the principal dwelling, you're meeting the side and that 12 feet rear setback. And if you have a 1-story ADU, that 5 feet rear and side setback we thought would be appropriate. So these were some of the key elements that we looked at. Again, it was very deep discussion with the Planning Commission. We went back and forth on multiple times, looking at ordinances, doing research. We think this ordinance as it's written now meets the needs for residents, meets the needs for what we saw in surveys, hopefully addresses some of the concerns of the Planning Commission. These are just some more images of the height that I was just mentioning earlier. So I'll certainly stop for questions, but in principle, we were kind of thinking about it as, residents should have the freedom to adapt their living space, right, to meet their unique family circumstances. As you know, we have, so much different family dynamics and changes. And we want to certainly make sure that folks, consider the broader impact of whatever they're building in the community. But we think that by embracing this flexibility with an eye towards responsible stewardship, ADUs can contribute to the enhancement of Edina's character and quality of life for present and future generations. And so we thought this would be a really great addition for the city, and we're very excited by it. I'm going to take this one. Yeah.
So just to kind of summarize the joint Planning Commission and staff recommendation. So Planning Commission took this up at their last meeting, March 13th, 2024, and voted unanimously to recommend approval of the proposed ordinance with the deletion of provision 36-439-2G, which states accessory dwelling units shall be constructed on a frost-protected foundation. That was what Quincy had talked about previously. Staff is comfortable with that deletion from the zoning code as frost protection is addressed in the building code, so it's essentially redundant. So the action requested of council tonight is close the in-person public hearing, keep public input open until Sunday, April 7th, and continue action to the April 16, 2024 City Council meeting. And with that, we would both be happy to take any questions.
Yeah, I'm sure there will be some questions here from council members. Member Jackson?
Well, I just want to say thank you, Commissioner Smith, and to all the Planning Commission. I know you've been working very, very hard on this. And from the first presentation you gave to tonight, you've ironed out a lot of wrinkles. And so I just want to acknowledge the very hard work, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, Member Pierce.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I echo Councilmember Jackson's comments. We all understand why we're doing this, and I do think this will be a welcome addition to the housing stock, if you will, in Edina. But I do have maybe two things. They might be the same. In your presentation, the slide where you have the primary resident, there's 3 verticals, then you have the dwelling in the back. The first time I saw that, this didn't strike me this way, but I've had some feedback from neighbors or residents on this, and I didn't think about it this way until now. But the way this is designed, I think it infringes on the neighbor. And so I'm going to give you an example. And so I kind of want you to think about, I think this infringes on the neighbor. And I'm going to give you the example. Our next door neighbor built a 3-car garage in their backyard. And I'm sure it meets code and all of that. The summer before that was built, we would be in our backyard, they could be in their backyard, and you may or may not even see them if we're out at the same time. But once the garage started to be built, it felt like it infringed on our ability to enjoy our backyard, because as we're sitting there, now we see the garage is in our view. And whether our neighbor is fixing a car or doing whatever, right, that's now in our view, whereas before it would have just been trees. And so what we ended up doing, we already had a privacy fence on most of our yard. And so we finished the other side of the privacy fence just to kind of shield us a little bit from that. So now we see the top of the garage, but we can't see like what they're doing in their backyard. And so I didn't think about that as the example until feedback from a few residents, and now looking at this. And so the question I would have, and I don't know if this is for you to answer tonight, but I would want you to consider if the homeowner, for very valid reasons, wants to do an ADU and we want to enable that. I think we did this design to allow the owner to have the best use of their property. And so in order to do that, right, we put the ADU in the back because it gives more space for the homeowner. What if we didn't do that? What if we had that ADU a little bit more infringe upon the owner who wants to build it? And so the setback can't be 5 feet. And I understand why this is this way. 5 feet, it's the existing, whatever the setback is of my home, if I'm the homeowner, is where this would end up, the ADU would end up being, which is right on that property line, right? But what if it was shifted over or even shifted forward a little bit so that now, as a homeowner, I got to think about, I really want that ADU, but it's going to eat into my usable backyard a little bit more than it would today. And so this idea of love it, definitely want to have this in our housing stock, but I do feel like this a little bit more infringes on the neighbor and not the owner as much. And so I don't know if you have thoughts around that, but that would be my question or feedback. Or
Want me to start?
I can go first. Sure. Now, this is a very valid question, right? So the way how we thought about this was, if there was an existing structure that was there, a shed, for example, then converting it into a living space would not be something that's completely different from the neighbors.
If it's existing.
If it's existing, right?
Okay.
So we certainly were thinking about this from a perspective of what's most cost effective. And if you already have an existing shed that you wanted to convert into an ADU, then if it's a conforming structure that's already existing, we think it's not going to be as imposing on neighbors as building something that's new. So that's certainly part of it. The other part of it too is that this is just one configuration. This is the minimum or the closest they can get to the lot lines. The owner has full discretion in moving that forward, closer to the main property if they see fit. Detached structures in other cities are a little bit closer to the primary dwelling, and it's just one configuration. We have the attached configuration and the internal configuration could also be considered too. So not all properties would have this kind of configuration, and I would guess that if someone decides to do that and they have an existing shed, they would most likely convert the shed. And the third part too was we from a principal perspective, we wanted folks to build something and use their space to meet their family's needs. And I totally get the need and the sense that it's infringing to some degree in the airspace of the neighbors who want to enjoy their backyard, and I totally get that. But we also were thinking about it from a perspective of how can we let families decide for themselves. Here's what I need for my family, for my generation, for my situation, and if this works for me, we wanted to make that flexible too. So something that we kind of really wrestle with, because that closeness concept was also something that came up in a lot of this discussion, but that's how we kind of reasoned it to come to this design. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, and I'll just add and say, we really started from a place of what's already allowed today, not for ADUs obviously, but for detached accessory structures. So if you want a one-story detached accessory building up to 1,000 square feet to build a detached studio or a pool house, you can do that right now, 18 feet high, 5 feet from a side and rear lot line. From the ADU survey, there was a lot of support for allowing ADUs above a detached garage, so we knew we would have to amend our height restriction for detached structures to make that possible. So a lot of discussion was had about what would be the appropriate setback for now a two-story detached structure. So we started the discussion at saying, let's say that it has to meet principal structure setbacks, because then you're talking about something within the footprint of where the house could be. And there was discussion amongst the planning commission, so that would be a 25-foot rear yard setback. And there was a lot of discussion about how that would just simply not be possible on a lot of properties. And so there was some feeling amongst the commissioners, I think, that if we're going to do this and we actually want ADUs to get built, we need to make it workable for one. And then I think somebody else also pointed out that, if these were, neighboring lots here, it's actually less imposing to have the ADU tucked in the back corner, at least for this, the neighbor next to you, versus having it right on the side, like closer to the house, because if this neighbor is looking out their back window, then it's right there versus tucked further back. There was some talk about that too, I think. So the commission ultimately settled on 12 as sort of being a compromise between those two, I think.
I think what I would ask us to consider is just think through screening. And so there are communities that do ADUs. I can't think of, I'm going to give you a southern example. I'm from Alabama. In South Carolina, they do ADUs above garages. They call them carriage houses, used for the same purpose that you're describing. If you put one that's on on the same foundation as the primary house, you do some kind of screening. And so that's essentially what we did, is we finished the privacy fence, and we were fine with that. In some communities, they do special hedges that could be 6 feet tall as much, and then you kind of add that screening on the side. And so and I know screening is not in here, and so options like that is what was in my mind, and then I'll finish my example. So my wife and I were fine with it. The neighbor directly behind them, they were really upset about it and reached out to the city, because in their backyard now, they're going to see this 3-car garage, which is really in the center of their backyard now. And so they really didn't like that, complained that it wasn't to code. You can kind of see how that conversation went. And it was to code, it was fine. And so it's there now. And I think that neighbor for sure is still not happy that their view now is the back of a 3-car garage. But if there was some kind of screening there, I think it might soften that infringement for the neighbor, while the owner still gets full use of the reason that they wanted to build it. So I would just ask you guys to think through perhaps some kind of screening, or what options we may or may not be able to come up with in those kinds of examples. Thank you.
I'm going to go to Member Risser, but before we go to Member Risser.
Can I continue? I'm sorry. Can I answer the question?
Go ahead, Commissioner.
So you're saying that the...
Hold that closer, would you,
Sure.
Commissioner?
Is that better? Sure.
Better.
So, your wife and you had to just deal with it and build your own screening or whatever for somebody's car. So what we're proposing is housing for human beings as opposed to housing for cars. So I don't see why we would require any more screening than you would need for a car.
Oh, so I'm glad that you said that. So let me be clear. I fully support ADUs and housing for people, right? We need more affordable housing, but we can't just do it any kind of way. And so what I am saying is that as we figure out how to solve the problem, what we have to be doing is thinking about both parties and not just the owner. And so that's all I'm asking for you to think about is for the neighbor, are there options so that this is not 100% centric on not infringing upon the owner? That's all I'm saying.
But that's only for housing, not for garages. Is that what you're saying?
I'm sorry?
It's only for housing and not for garages?
I think it's for everything. So I'm not saying just for housing.
Are you proposing changing the law for garages and outbuildings?
I'm not understanding why. I feel like we're in some kind of debate, and I'm giving you my feedback on this proposal. So I'm going to say it again, and if you can't tell, you really are irritating me right now. And so I'm going to say it again. I am 100% for affordable housing. I believe ADUs make sense. Clear? Are you clear?
Oh, yes. Is that the question?
Okay.
Yes.
What I'm proposing is, if we're coming forward with an option, that we think broadly about what the impact of that option is, not just for the owner, but for those to the left, to the right, and to the back. And there are options that we can come up with. There are suggestions that I think we may be able to come up with that make it a great option for everybody, not just the owner. And so that's what I'm suggesting. I am not talking about garages and sheds because that's not what you're presenting. If you were presenting an option to build a 4-car garage and this was your presentation, I would say the same thing. Is that clear?
Yeah, but this is housing for people.
Why do you keep saying that?
Because we allow it for cars. If you have an F-150, you can house it there.
Yeah, and I'm saying I think we should try to find ways that when we're making suggestions for properties, that we're trying to find ways that it doesn't infringe upon your neighbor to the left, your neighbor to the right, your neighbor in the rear.
But it can infringe if it's an F-150.
No, Lou, what?
That's the current law. That's the way it is today.
And I'm saying we shouldn't do that. And I'm saying we shouldn't do that.
I think we.
Try to find a
So
way.
anyway, the two other points I wanted to make is that those are not.
Wait a minute. Wait.
Okay.
Yeah, you're not going to just talk over me. If you don't agree with what I'm saying, that's one thing. If you don't agree with me, then we can have a conversation outside of council. But my preference would be that you, being on the planning commission, that you would be open to hearing feedback, because that's why you're here. And I gave you feedback. Whether you like it or not is your issue. If you want to dig into it and understand my perspective and the perspective of some others, then we should have those conversations.
So this isn't going to go back to the planning commission. This is going to stay with us now. So we'll be able to deal with this issue here. Yeah.
There were two other points I'd like to make. One is that this is not a required minimum or maximum. I mean, the ADU isn't required to be that close. So there's no necessarily.
Commissioner, would you hold that microphone a little closer?
I'm sorry.
I'm
Yeah.
understanding. Yeah,
Just
thank you.
sounds kind of loud. There's no requirement that the ADU be this close, right? That's just the closest it can be. That's the second point. The third point is the further away you make the ADU from the property line and the closer you make it to the resident's house, the more likely the people in that ADU are going to use the area behind it as their backyard or recreational space. And so that would, I think, infringe more on the neighbor behind them than having it closer out where their backyard is actually the backyard of their resident's house. Thank you.
Right. All right, I'm going to go to Member Risser, who has some questions or comments. Member Risser?
Okay, first, I'd like to thank the Planning Commission for all the work that they have done. I would also like to acknowledge the fact that in terms of Edina's architectural history, we have this wonderful, rich tradition of mid-century ramblers that have 2 doors on the facades, and the ones that are built with a hill in the back oftentimes have a lower level, fully equipped living space, which I think, is something that continues to be maintained in parts of Edina. And I know in my neighborhood, one neighbor did a beautiful job just really fixing up that lower level. And I think, one of the stipulations in the proposed ordinances that you cannot have a house that's got 2 doors on it, but I got to make the case, or at least put it out there, that if that is part of the architectural history of that neighborhood, if it is part of the character of the neighborhood, I think that would be a logical thing. And I know it now is becoming more of a trend to be building homes that have a single level that you can live completely on with kitchen, laundry, all of that, and then to have another one down below. And so I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that this could be something that came back, but I just wanted to get that out there. And so that's really my only concern. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Member Risser. And to the point that Member Pierce was making, I guess that if, depending on how the conversation goes here, it could be sent back to the Planning Commission, as well as us dealing with it here. We can have that conversation. So I'm going to turn now to Member Agnew.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So one question I had was, there was a provision in there, I think it was related to the maximum size of approximately or exactly 1,000 feet for these spaces. And there was an exception specific to basements. And that completely makes sense. You might have a larger than 1,000 square foot basement. Why are we not also potentially applying that to attic space where you might have your top floor that you're trying to convert into an accessory dwelling unit, and the top floor of your house might be more than 1,000 feet? Did you consider that, and can you speak to that?
So that provision was something that we noticed that the City of Crystal had in their ordinance. Theirs didn't address attics. But I believe what it came down to was you can be more limited in ways you can provide access into a basement. With an attic, you could potentially have an exterior staircase or create an additional staircase inside the dwelling. It might be a little harder to do that in the basement and partition off just 1,000 square feet while keeping access for the primary dwelling unit to also get down to that basement. So it's not to say that we couldn't also create that exception for attics. I don't think it was something that was really discussed too much with the group, but that's kind of the intent behind it is really, I think that they were seeing some variances for that and just trying to avoid those.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Is there anything, and I know I've just sprung this on you then, but is there anything that you think would prevent that from being an appropriate modification to make to this ordinance if we were to also include attics?
I think it's possible. I think we could certainly look at that. I think that's not a bad idea at all. Sorry. Yes, I think we could look at that. Absolutely.
Commissioner, don't you let those arms sneak down.
Okay.
Thank you. I actually don't have any questions, but I also should have thanked you, you and the rest of the Planning Commission for all of the work that you did on this. I know this was a long process, and I think that this was one where I noticed a lot of really great engagement, a lot of really great feedback gathered through Better Together, through surveys and different kind of ways of connecting with people. So I just want to commend you all on the work that you did for that. I do want to kind of respond or just kind of offer my thoughts on the potential to add screening or add that as a requirement. My initial inclination, even having read the feedback that we got from community members as well, is I don't necessarily like requiring the screening if we're not also going to require it for other type of accessory units. I shouldn't say units. Accessory structures is probably the ideal. And so I think that because screening is already an option, right, like in your example, Councilmember Pierce, you were able to add that privacy fence in. I think that would remain an option, and so I would prefer to use that, but also open to what other council members think on that. And if it's something that we continue to receive feedback on, maybe it's something that we could spin out into its own kind of ordinance if this is something broader that we're receiving feedback on from members of the community of having their kind of property rights infringed upon based off of all kinds of accessory structures in general. But otherwise, I really like all of the feedback that I know was iterated on. I think Councilmember Jackson mentioned this as well. It's come a long way, and so just appreciate all the effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Agnew. Couple of things. I was probably the biggest skeptic on this thing, not because I didn't like the idea of the ADU, but I was trying to think downstream about, you get a tight neighborhood like Country Club, somebody spends hundreds of thousands of dollars building an apartment for one of their relatives, and none of us live forever, and now that becomes a rental, and there's tight parking over there now. We don't allow parking on the street. But people start parking on the street anyway, and I could see that as a downstream problem, but we do have that ordinance that is in place that covers us on street parking in the wintertime and no more than 6 hours, I think, the rest of the year. So I've gotten more comfortable with that. So a couple of questions, though. So to this issue that Member Pierce raised, it's interesting in the context of, think about somebody not having a garage in the back, but building a garage and deciding they're going to put an ADU above the garage. Now, you're proposing that because that would be an allowable use. You got to allow more height. And so you got the situation where you got the new garage, and then you got the situation where somebody's already got a garage back there, like this neighbor, Member Pierce's, and now they decide, hey, that's a great idea. I'm just going to peel the roof off and go up another 6-8 feet. And so I don't know what to do with that. I mean, I think Commissioner Miranda's point was, well, this is what the code allows now. So that's all we were trying to do, is be consistent with the code. But we don't allow a garage now that's 8, we have a certain height restrictions on a garage, and we're thinking we're going to allow more height on a garage in order to accommodate an ADU. Well, what might that mean to the neighbors, and what that might cause us to think about in terms of changing that rear yard setback or that side yard setback? I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's an interesting sort of dilemma versus, where you've got new construction versus remodel of a garage. And anyway, I don't know, Mr. Lewis, maybe you guys all talked about that at the Planning Commission.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're hitting on it, that it's ultimately a trade-off. And one thing the commission discussed, again, was wanting to make these be actually possible. And so like I said, we started with, where could you have up to 25 feet today? Well, that's within the setbacks for the principal structure. So whether it's a detached ADU that's 25 feet or your house that's 30 feet, you could have a structure that high within that footprint if it was your house. So we started there, and there was some feeling amongst the Planning Commission that requiring that 25-foot rear yard setback was just going to be too big of a barrier for a lot of properties, that people just aren't going to push an ADU that far into their property. And so, it kind of came down to that trade-off of accepting some change with trying to allow ADUs to actually happen.
So how much extra height was it? I'm going to your memo here. To if you want to do in South Carolina, they call it a frog. Family room above garage, over garage. And they're actually little, like, one-bedroom apartments is what they are. They're beautiful, but they've designed them in a way where they're the ones I've seen are at when you come in the driveway, they're right there, part of a little complex, so that they're not infringing on the neighbor. They're part of a kind of almost like a compound where the garage and the frog are separate from the house, but they're kind of at right angles to each other. Anyway, I thought we had something about, the first question was, how much do we have to raise the height for the garage allowance?
So it's looking at increasing the allowance from a maximum of 18 feet, which is the current height limit, up to 25 feet to accommodate that second story. So it's an additional 7 feet, which then sort of Planning Commission used that logic to increase the setback by 7 feet. So it's sort of a 1-to-1. Each foot in height, an additional foot in setback.
Well, that makes sense. Yeah. Okay. And then I thought we had something in our code about lot coverage. Where is the language in the proposed ordinance about the maximum amount of lot coverage you could have, which would include the ADU?
Yep, it would still be included. So they would still be limited to 50% impervious, and then either 25% or 30% building coverage, depending on the size of the lot. So that's still going to be...
Our existing rule would apply.
Yep.
Even if you add an ADU.
Yep.
Okay, and this may be for Director T, or maybe for you too, or maybe Mr. Kendall. So if you go to Minnetonka, you get to build an ADU, but you have to get a conditional use permit to do it. And so why did we do it this way instead of by using a conditional use permit? What was the thinking there?
Sure, and that is at your discretion as well. That was part of this and part of what we discussed. We looked at a lot of the other communities, and the majority of them allow it by right. Part of that is, again, just to kind of streamline that permitting process and make it easier and not add costs to the applicants.
If I might add to that, conditional use permits, it's somewhat challenging process for cities to deny a conditional use permit if they're meeting all the conditions.
Right.
So the thought here is, well, let's put all the conditions into the ordinance that we're looking for and make it by right.
Yeah, that's my understanding too. If you meet if you meet the litany of requirements for a CUP, you're getting the CUP. Here, we're saying we get more control.
We're saying,
Not having a
yeah,
CUP.
it's correct.
Right.
We're essentially deciding on those conditions up front rather than inviting people to a public hearing for a conditional use permit when the applicant is meeting those conditions, and then we're sort of in a position where we're asking for public input, but we have to approve it anyway.
Okay. So just back to the garage again. So if I'm going to build a new garage and I want to put an ADU above the garage and I want to go to 25 feet, I got to move the garage 7 feet closer to the house. All right? What if I want to do it now? I got in a garage there, I want to tear the roof off of it and put on. How do you deal with that problem? It's on the existing setback.
Yeah, then it's not going to be allowed.
Not going to be allowed?
Nope.
All right.
They could apply for a variance.
Okay.
Go through that
You could apply for a
process.
variance.
Right.
Okay. Member Agnew.
I'll also add, because this was something that I had asked about as well, it's unlikely that given kind of current accessory garages that are standalone, that they could simply add an additional level due to like water and just kind of the construction of that garage. And so in a lot of situations, if it's a detached garage to begin with, they would have to do a reconstruction of it.
I suspect that there are quite a few garages in our town that have a storage up there. And I don't think it'd be that hard to run your infrastructure. But anyway, I get your point. Member Pierce.
Just to follow up on that, so it seems like the examples that we're using are on smaller lots. Even the example that you just used, Mayor, if there's an existing garage, we can build something on top of that garage, right? Meeting this standard.
Yes, if it's 12 feet from the rear setback. Yes.
With a variance, but you have to get a
With the
variance.
variance.
If it's 5 feet, no. If it's 12 feet, yes. But if you want to build it on the 5 feet setback, then you need a variance to do that.
So then my question is, did we look at all of our neighborhoods to see if the standard made sense there? So as an example, if you're in Parkwood Knoll has duplexes, right there, and the lots are larger, right? In some sections of Highlands, the lots are wider, deeper. And I think, Addison, you showed an example of a home that had a pool house in the back. And so when you look at those things, like it fits with the neighborhood. And so my comments earlier are in response to if we're applying this in the way that you've described it in our neighborhood where it doesn't fit. And so did we look at that, or did we? Go ahead.
Yeah, I would just say, yeah. I mean, we spent a lot of time like looking at different parts of the city and, you know, different lot shapes and configurations and where do people have detached structures now and how could it fit, and, you know, using GIS to kind of measure it out and look at different examples. So we did spend a lot of time with that. I mean, you're hitting on one thing where we do just have one single R1 district for all of Edina.
Yeah.
And we make that work today kind of through different standards and things like that. And that's why, you know, there's some variability here. Like if you have a wider lot, you're going to have a wider side yard setback here. So I would say, yeah, we spent a lot of time thinking about different neighborhoods and what would be appropriate.
Because the issue I would have is using the frog concept. if the neighbor has now an existing garage and they can build an ADU on top of that, now it's above my first level. Their ADU is. It's above my first level. And so now when I'm in my backyard, there's someone now living there and they're looking down on me, or I'm able to look at them, or what have you. And I get you might not agree with this, but I do think, thinking about how are we infringing upon the neighbor is a question we should be asking. And if there's nothing that we can do about it, that's great. And then I'll respond to Councilmember Agnew. My issue, and I'm just being really transparent, we don't have an issue because we spent money and we put up a privacy fence. But not everybody in Edina can do that. And so we have to think about everybody. We can't just say, well, yeah, you just put up the screening and you're good to go. But I have to say, if we said as a city to my neighbor, yeah, you can do that. You can put the garage there, but you're gonna have to put up some screening, and it's your responsibility to do that. I'm certain my neighbor would have come to me and say, hey, we got to put this fence up. Would you go in on it? And we would have said, sure, right? But if we're not thinking about ways to deal with things like that, I just think it's a challenge for the community, because we want these things to be long-standing, sustainable options for our city.
Yeah, I just to comment on that, I think it's a very fair point for sure. How the properties would impact neighbors, and that's certainly part of the survey process, the communication process, the focus group process. We really try to flush out how would this impact the city, and I think overwhelmingly folks are in favor. But of course, I think there would be a couple residents might have a concern, and so I think the one thing that we could potentially look at here is the two-story structure. I think we could, if that's really a sticking point, we could take a look at that. But overall, we certainly wanted to maximize this for folks who have existing structures, of course, right, and kind of do what's best for their families. But I think, this is a starting point for us, and I think this is a good starting point, but we're very open to adjusting over time, too. I think that's a good adjustment.
Yeah, so where I live, we have, it's a big tear down neighborhood. And so the house across the street from us used to be a cute little bungalow on a double piece of property. And now it's a quite large house with a 3-car garage and a very large driveway in front. And they pretty much clear cut the entire property so that our house faces west. And so we just get blazoned by the sun if it weren't for the one tree in front of our house. So we'd love them to have some sort of privacy fence or put in more trees, but they didn't do that. So we have no choice over that. It's just the way things work. On the south side of our property, we have a tear down there also. And that house is very large compared to our house. And in fact, it changed our driveway for most of the winter. So our driveway is ice, a sheet of ice most of the winter. But again, we love our neighbors, so we don't really blame them for it. And then on the east side of our house, which is also a tear down, which is behind us, and they built up to the property line to where they're allowed to build as close as they can. So they look back on our backyard. So we have that as a house, not an ADU doing that. And that's legal in Edina. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
How did you decide on the 18-foot height limitation at 1.5 stories?
That is the existing height limit for detached structures. So if you wanted to today, build a pool house or a detached studio, which many people do, and they often resemble ADUs, that's what's allowed currently.
Okay. Good to know. What's a typical ridge line on a single-story home? The height?
how high does it go? We have a 30-foot height limit, which can be increased, I think, depending on lot width and setback.
It varies depending on your lot width, so anywhere between 30 and 40 feet to the ridge line.
Did you think about that issue of looking at lot width, like we've done with setbacks over the years? As developers went into smaller lots and built bigger houses, we had to increase the setbacks. Did you think about that at all relative to the ADU over the garage? In other words, in smaller lots, you'd be limited to 18 feet, so that you couldn't go into a 75-foot wide lot and put a 2-story garage with a 25-foot height limitation on it.
Yeah, I think a lot of the smaller lots is where we recognize is where a lot of the detached garages already are. So we looked at what would be like the minimum height we would have to increase to accommodate that second story. And from some feedback from some ADU builders and architects, kind of settled on that 25 feet.
That was on a 50-foot lot then, 50-foot wide lot?
Yep, that would apply to any lot.
Okay.
So we really just tried to accommodate like the minimum height that you would need to get that second story on there.
And I think we all recognize you did a lot of work on this, and we are appreciative of that, but still a few things to talk through. Okay, any other questions for staff? This is a public hearing matter. Stand by. I'm going to open this up now for any public testimony from people who are interested in commenting on this proposed form of ordinance. Don't see anybody coming forward. Don't hear anybody. Here he comes.
Hi, my name is Ryan Seamers. I live at 5821 Wooddale. I'm here to speak on support of this cause. I think that Councilmember Pierce and Agnew and even Mr. Mayor Hovland have brought up an excellent point about the concern about encroachment onto the private space of other people's residents. But I think we need to really take a look at all of our cities' approach to redevelopment and the raise and rebuild of over 1,000 homes that have happened in East Edina that have done exactly that to existing homeowners. Like homes that are now 3 times the size, 3 times the price, taking the place of affordable housing. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to stabilize housing for existing residents, existing homeowners, as well as give opportunities for those residents to live in those houses longer, to create generational housing. And I think that is a greater trade-off than just allowing new McMansions and the privileged to be able to move in and tear down the housing stock that's already there. And I think if we want to address that, we need to do it citywide and not just apply it to ADUs. I think your concerns are absolutely warranted, and I think it is worth looking at further considerations in terms of the impact of looking into a neighbor's yard, such as windows on the sides that are facing your neighbors. Like, what heights are those? You know, so are they letting light in or are they letting visibility in? But I think that's going to be sorted out in time. I think it's going to be sorted out as we start to see what the homeowners and new development actually brings to us. But I think this is an excellent first step to actually see what happens.
All right. Yes, thanks for coming in, Mr. Seaworth. All right. You can stand on the side podium. It's easier to go to the side podium, I think, than give us your name and address and share your thoughts with us.
Which button do I push?
Yeah, you can go ahead and start, and it'll catch up to you.
Greg Johnson, 5204 Abercrombie Drive in Brookview Heights. We haven't heard anything about effect on tax rates according to how it's going to affect it with the square footage on the properties. Is that even an issue, or do you only tax the original property? If somebody puts another property, another building on that property, is that's added to your taxes? I haven't heard a thought on that whatsoever.
No, that would be a taxable piece of property.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, no matter where you put it, if you attached it or if you built up or you put it in your backyard, it's a taxable piece of property. I don't know if anybody has thought about that, but my wife did. The other thing, I want to thank Mr. Pierce for his comments. I think it's very, very important to consider the effect on neighbors. So I don't know where to go with that, but in our neighborhood, which is quite open and we enjoy it that way, if all of a sudden we have another structure in the other yards, I have another structure, it happens to be a chicken house, but it doesn't really obstruct anything very much. But you do have that instruction, then you also have population density. When I first heard about this, when I read it in the paper, that's the first thing I thought is something that's been irritating me ever since we've lived here 30 years, and just the recent push for more density of our population. I don't quite understand it. I somewhat understand it, but anyway, that's just my comments. Taxes and effect on neighbors.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
All right.
Good evening, Janie Weston, 6136 Brookview Avenue. Mr. Pierce, I understand your pain. It's awful. I've had 3 tear-down builders tear down the houses behind my house, and the elevation is higher of the thresholds of those houses. They used to be single-story or 1.5-story. Now they're all 2 full-story with their lovely bathrooms in the bump out on the back of the 2nd floor, and the bathtubs right in front of huge windows. They get to look at my backyard from their bathtub. I don't know why builders do this, but I wasn't happy that every single tree was cut down that used to give privacy. They're all gone. So I understand how you feel about that. And those were houses allowed by code. So it would be really nice to require arborvitaes that will not get as high as the power lines to be put along back property lines. I would love to see that. So far, none of the new houses have done that. So anyway, I am basically in favor of ADUs. There's a good reason for them. I have a studio workshop that's a 1.5-story upstairs. As my knees get worse, I may not want to go up there to my drawing boards anymore on the upper level. And I could perhaps take on an artist's apprentice to come and live in a converted upper level of the stone carving studio down below. That would make a lot of sense. Or one of my grandchildren, once they become adults, don't want to live with mom and dad. Yeah, maybe I could convince them to come and live at grandma's house in the ADU. It would be really nice. But one thing I don't want to have be required is that they tie the water and the sewer into where they're in my house. It just isn't reasonable, and it would not make sense with where the position on my lot of my 1.5-story studio building is. It only makes sense if I could put water and sewer to do straight new lines, fresh new lines, not old water line that might start leaking if I try to tap into what I already have. It just makes sense. So please don't require that it be added on to what the current house has.
I think that's the default, but there is a provision I noticed in the ordinance that would provide for individual analysis of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
To do the most reasonable approach for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Phyllis Nelson. I'm 5208 Abercrombie Drive in Brookview Heights. And the Johnsons are my good neighbors, and they're wonderful people. And I'm blessed because they're right there for you every minute of the day. And my thing is there going to be some kind of what these are going to look like? Is it going to be like a shed with a few windows and a door? I mean, is it going to be tacky? Is there some prerequisite that how they're going to look? That it's not going to be like a tar shed or something like that? So that's my concern. And
Thanks, Ms. Nelson.
The privacy.
Anyone else? All right.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. My name is Steve Brown. I live at 5528 Halifax Lane. This conversation has caused me to reflect a little bit on the comments that I'm going to make, but I will go ahead and make them anyway. I submitted comments in support of the ADU ordinance on Better Together Edina, and I'm not going to repeat those here. Instead, I'd like to commend both the council and the Planning Commission. I commend the council for taking a very deliberate approach to this ordinance. I was initially shocked and dismayed when this ordinance was first proposed and the council rejected it. It seemed to me that the argument for an ADU ordinance were compelling, and that since 25 of our neighboring communities have already approved an ADU ordinance, this seemed like a straightforward, easy decision. I'm now very glad the council pushed back and asked for a little bit more work. I also commend the Planning Commission and Addison Lewis for taking this request for more work very seriously. Having attended all 4 of the Planning Commission's work sessions for developing the ordinance and all their Planning Commission meetings that dealt with this ordinance, I can attest to the thoroughness and the thoughtfulness of the discussion. I was particularly impressed with the frequent use of plat maps and aerial views from the many different types of neighborhoods to ensure careful consideration of what would be the impact of Edina's many different neighborhoods, each characterized by different lot sizes, lot configurations, and street and alley configurations. They put a lot of thought into what they've come up with. And part of what they were trying to do was to ensure that this ordinance is fair for everyone. It's not just for people who have large lots that can easily put up a secondary structure. They wanted to make sure that folks who live in Morningside, who have the same issues everybody else has, who would like to have an ADU, has the opportunity to build that ADU. I thought that was very thoughtful. The resulting ordinance does a good job of balancing the clear need for ADUs with the need to ensure the interests of neighbors and the community are protected. The Planning Commission's thorough process has produced an ordinance that is carefully crafted to ensure that it will work throughout the entire city and will minimize the need for variances, another very important consideration. I believe that Edina has once again set the standard, in this case, the standard for an effective ADU ordinance. This is a direct result of the City Council's request for more work and the Planning Commission's careful and thoughtful response. ADUs are a simple way to add much needed housing in a fully developed community like Edina. We know the community agrees with the Planning Commission's survey. Work showed that 70% of those surveyed support the concept of ADUs. This is something that Edina residents want. We just have to make sure that it is a simple ordinance that allows people to build them and works in all the different neighborhoods. The ordinance provides one more tool in the toolbox for much-needed additional housing in Edina. I urge you to approve this ordinance at your next meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Anyone else in the audience wish to testify? Yes, sir. Welcome. Saw you from a distance the other morning and didn't get to say
Oh, yeah.
hi.
Well, hello.
Over there at the favorite restaurants place.
Yeah. My name's Tom Kuhn, and I live at 4410 Grimes Avenue. Yeah, that's up in Morningside. I kind of feel like if somebody owns a piece of land in America, it's theirs to do as they want to use, as long as they're not physically harming their neighbor. I grew up in a duplex. My grandmother and great aunt lived on the other side. There are a lot of people that are going toward extended family, living on their land or property. I also owned a duplex that I lived in to get started on the property ladder. So I'm used to having somebody else living close to me. That's how I lived most of my life until I moved to Edina. I understand that Mr. Pierce is concerned. Thankfully, due to your liberal zoning regarding McMansions, and I can now see what my neighbor has in his refrigerator. After they got done construction and put several large windows looking directly into my bedroom. But beside that, it's their right, and I just live with it. As far as the back of the yard, I would think twice about how far you want those buildings from the back property line, because as was discussed in some of the planning commissions, what's going to happen behind that building is that's where you're going to put your stuff that you don't want to look at. So if you've got 20 feet, you're going to have more stuff in there that, you just don't want to look at. But if you have a big backyard that you're looking at as a property owner, you're going to keep it neat and tidy. You're not going to worry about what's behind the garage, as I see in my neighborhood. And so I would say just go with a minimum backyard setback, just because I think you're just going to have a trash collection otherwise, or junk collection. And I'm slightly guilty of that. Granted, I have a very deep lot, but that's all I have to say is I'm supportive of it. I worked on the housing task force, and I think it's a good thing, whether somebody needs a little extra money to stay in Edina. Edina is even less dense in many of the single family because we have smaller households. I mean, back in the 60s and 50s, you had far more kids and people living in the same houses you have today. So I don't think the density in the single family neighborhood is that big an issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kuhn. Another gentleman back there. Yes, sir. Good evening.
I know you guys. How's it going? I'm Jimmy Bennett, 4501 Brookside. I serve on the Planning Commission as chair. Great presentation, great feedback, everyone. I'm just here to personally support accessory dwelling units in Edina for all the reasons mentioned. Secondly, I'm here to support the ordinance as drafted. Is it perfect? No. But does it reflect almost a couple years of negotiation, deep, thorough research, collaboration with other residents, stakeholders, ultimately reflecting a compromise toward a modest step forward, an incremental step forward? Yes. So I would say from my experience on the Planning Commission, a lot of times we feel like things are great and you guys are going to approve them, but we know sometimes it doesn't happen. So I would say when you make your decision in a couple weeks, I'd ask you to address three things. One, do you simply support ADUs in Edina? 2, do you support the ordinance as drafted? And if not, what specific direction or discrete points do you contend with? So that we may, the Planning Commission, as well as staff, and if we need to leverage other resources, other collaborators, we can get back to work to the drawing board and get this thing tweaked and addressed to get it supported. So it sounds like maybe a couple things I noticed and wanted to address. We're talking about 3 types of ADUs: interior, attached, and detached. It sounds like there's kind of support for the first 2. The detached is where most of this discussion comes from. So I'd say regarding imposition that you've noted, Mr. Pearson, I feel like everyone else could logically see that there's a couple things that we talked about. One, it's height, proximity, quality of materials, as well as was something there or not before. That's all that imposition. So what we came up with a number, that 25 feet, that provides the most flexibility for someone to do 2 stories. Could you do something shorter? Yes, but it governs the design of the structure. Could you do it shorter and have, like 1.5 to 2 stories, but look more like a 1.5 story? Yeah, we could. So these are just examples, but I'd ask you again to just provide us with very discrete direction so we don't let this thing die if you don't support it, but ultimately that's what we're asking you to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Chair Bennett, thanks for being here. Anyone else? All right, let's turn to Director Benarott and see if we have anybody waiting online to testify. We do not. Okay. Council members, did that colloquy, that dialogue by our residents create any questions for staff for any of you? Member Ursa, any questions for staff at this point in time?
No, just I was serious though about allowing houses that are historically accurate and have 2 entrances on them, and I just would like to see if people could look into that possibility, because I do know that there's language that specifically says you can't have that. But if it is an established architectural style, I think it would make sense to allow it. Thank you.
All right, yeah, we can maybe have staff take a look at that between now and 2 weeks from now, the meeting on April 16th. Member Jackson.
Yeah, I want to address that right now because the way I read the ordinance is that's allowed. That's what an attached ADU is, whether it's in the basement or upstairs. And so I'm a little confused as to why that would be an issue, because I think that you've addressed that already.
My understanding was that you had to have 1 single door, and then it could work out to lead to 2 separate units inside. Anyway, I might be wrong on that detail, but I thought it specifically said if you had 2 doors on the facade, that was a problem.
Yeah, so what the ordinance says is that the creation of the accessory dwelling unit shall not result in an additional entrance facing the public street. So if there was only 1 door on the front of the house, you couldn't add a second door to create an entrance to the ADU. I suppose if we already had a house where there was 2 doors existing and then you're modifying or remodeling the interior space to create that ADU, then that's not a new entrance, so that would be okay.
Clarification, I'm saying that if you're on a block and you've got houses that have 2 entrances and then you've got a house that does not, but adding a second entrance would be consistent with the neighborhood character, that should be considered okay.
Sure, so in that scenario, you're right, that would require a variance. So to make that not require a variance, we would have to take that provision out. And I'll just say that provision is really intended to maintain the appearance of a single family home so that when you look at it, it just looks like 1 house, not 2 units. But it's at council's discretion to take that out as well.
Could there be nuance where I don't want to, it would be adding the stipulation that if two entrances was consistent with the character of the neighborhood. So it wouldn't just happen anywhere in Edina, but it would be where that's already an established architectural style.
It would be challenging to write that, the character of the neighborhood. Is it one house? Is it two houses? Is it three? But it would be justification for a variance to look at that on a case-by-case basis. And if we saw a run on those types of variances, we could always take a look at the code and amend at that time.
Okay, fair enough. That sounds logical.
Yeah, it seems like a logical approach. Okay, staff recommendation is that we pass a motion to close the in-person public hearing, keep the public input open until Sunday, April 7th at noon, and continue the action to the April 16, 2024 City Council meeting. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Second.
Jackson moves the motion as stated. Member Pierce seconds it. Any further discussion? Okay, here we go. Member Jackson.
Aye.
Member Pierce.
Aye.
Member Agnew.
Aye.
Member Risser.
Aye.
Mayor, aye. Passes unanimously. The motion's approved. We'll close the public input on Sunday, April 7th at noon, and continue the action to the April 16, 2024 City Council meeting. Thanks, everyone, for all that terrific input, and thanks again to everybody on the Planning Commission that worked so hard on this, and thanks,
Thank you so much.
Commissioner Smith, for being with us today. Appreciate you being here. All right, we're going to move on now to the reports and recommendations portion of the agenda, and we've got a couple of matters here that are related, and it's what we've come to know as the Concord B and C Street Reconstruction Project. And Director Milner is looking for some guidance based on a petition that was filed by the neighbors, and we've had neighbors that were really engaged here and done a lot of research and given this a lot of thought. And Director Milner, you've been good about responding. You responded to one of my questions on Easter Sunday morning, so thanks for that. And that was raised by one of our residents. So let me get into the right spot on my computer here. And so I'll turn to you now. I think you've got it in two parts. One is a petition response for the Concord BNC Street Reconstruction Project you want to address first, and get some guidance from council on that, and then we can turn to the cost issue.
Correct.
Or the financing issue. Okay.
Yep. I think that petition
And you've got
response.
Mr. Scipione with you too.
Correct. We're going to split the presentation here, and definitely
right.
looking for some feedback from the City Council tonight on this petition response related to the Concord BNC Neighborhood Roadway Reconstruction Project. So again, on your consent agenda, you accepted the petition this evening on the consent agenda. So you have received it. We're ready to respond on the same night. That's not a typical practice. But I wanted to provide just a little big picture background on this project. The next item, like you mentioned, Mayor, we're seeking approval of a contract of $7.3 million. We have the 2 Minutes Roadways. They gave us some great pricing on this project. We're, again, reconstructing 2+ miles of streets. Our water, sewer, and storm sewer systems are due for rehabilitation. So this petition discussion is a very small portion of the project. It shouldn't, in my opinion, delay the contract award tonight. Anything we do or you direct us to do are small changes in the overall contract. BR is ready to start in 2 weeks. They want to get going. We want to take advantage of these great prices. We don't want to delay, and the small changes will not affect whether we need to rebid or do anything with the contract. So just wanted to lay that out first. And then I'll hand it over to Andrew to do a little bit on the background with the city's vision and goals related to the Bike and Ped Master Plan.
Thanks, Chad. Thank you, Mayor, members of council. As a city's pedestrian and bicycle advocate, I wanted to talk about the city's guiding values and strategic documents that guide how we implement multimodal infrastructure, specifically into our street reconstruction programs. Going back to Vision Edina, which is almost 10 years old now, has a goal to continue to promote and develop a sidewalk, trail, and bike network to improve accessibility and connectivity throughout the city and beyond. In our 2018 comprehensive plan, in the transportation chapter, there's a goal to improve mobility for residents, visitors, and businesses, including those with transportation disadvantages, through the creation and maintenance of a balanced system of transportation alternatives, which include pedestrians, bicyclists, transit risers, and motorists. And then in our Living Streets plan, we strive to make Edina a place where transportation utilizing all modes is equally safe and accessible. Another key guiding document is our pedestrian and bicycle master plan. This is the city's framework for becoming more bikeable and walkable. This plan was developed as a result of extensive public engagement process. We held open houses, we had workshops, listening sessions, commission meetings, public hearings, including here at City Council. And then we also had online and in-person engagement events and opportunities to provide feedback. One of the key recommendations that came out of that plan is this twin loops concept, which is borrowed from the Parks Strategic Plan. The twin loops is intended to be a high comfort shared use facility that connects all four quadrants of the community to schools, parks primarily, but also to other community destinations. The intent here is to build an all ages and abilities network. Within the Concord neighborhood specifically, some of the adjacent amenities that this facility would connect to include Concord, Southview, and Normandale schools, the Edina Community Center. To the south, it includes Roslyn Park, the Edina Aquatic Center, and the Edina Arts Center. Within the Concord neighborhood itself, the plan recommends a sidewalk on Concord Avenue and a shared use path on Wooddale. This shared use path is a section of that Twin Loops facility that I mentioned before. As we've discussed at the public hearing back in December, and as Director Miller will touch on again later, when we got into specific design for this project, we ran into obstacles on Wooddale Avenue that made it difficult for us to implement that facility on Wooddale Avenue, which is why we're proposing it on Concord Avenue instead. In addition, as the council is well aware, every 2 years we distribute a quality of life survey to our residents. In the years 2015 and 17, 6 out of 10 respondents noted that they would be more likely to walk or bike if there were more sidewalks, paths, or trails. In the most recent quality of life survey, there were a number of comments related to lack of sidewalks and safe bike paths in our community, and noted that they felt it was unsafe for their kids to walk to school, and there's a general lack of walkability and bikeability within our community. So using that feedback and based on all these guiding documents, we continue to make improvements toward making our city more walkable, more bikeable, building more facilities, filling gaps in our network, with the understanding that the more we connect our network, the easier it is to utilize.
So let's get into the details on the actual petition that you received on the consent agenda this evening. So the petition, this is the words right from the petition. They're requesting 4 items. Direct staff to modify plans, and they had A and B. So refrain from installation of a shared use path or any facility at all. Number 2, if a facility is determined necessary, direct staff to install a 5-foot elevated sidewalk, A, directly adjacent to the roadway with no boulevard, and to B, maintain the facility. Item 3 is to confirm whether one-sided parking is necessary, and if so, consider east side of Concord Avenue. And for the sake of due process, direct staff to share design plans with residents, send letters to those acutely impacted, and halt construction until resident concerns are resolved. So those are the 4 items I'll discuss here in detail and give feedback to the City Council. So as Andrew mentioned, Concord Avenue between Valley View Road and 64th Street is really what we're discussing. At the council meeting in December, the council did approve an 8-foot concrete shared use path along the west side of Concrete Avenue. That's the circle there, a red circle on the map. The ETC, there was a question today about what was the ETC feedback. So in October 2023, they had a meeting and supported staff recommendations of moving this facility to Concord Avenue. They again discussed it at their meeting last week and will submit an advisory communication at the next council meeting. But they just got it done. It wasn't time to get it in the packet. It was emailed to you, but they had 4 key points, and they continue to recommend supporting this wide facility on Concord Avenue, and they want the council to consider that community-wide benefit in the inner loop. So ETC has twice commented on support for this facility. So back to the details. This is what we shared with you at the public hearings in December of Concord Avenue. So on the top is the existing roadway. It's today 30 feet wide. What was approved is a 24-foot wide road with an 8-foot concrete shared use path with a 0 to a 3-foot grass boulevard. Now there's some comments about the labeling of these graphics. We use a program called Street Mix. They only have a sidewalk label. They don't have a label that has shared use paths. So there's a little discrepancy in what we're calling it versus what this software program can put in these graphics. I think these graphics are very helpful in the conversation. There's discussion of why we can't do it on Wooddale, as was in the bike ped master plan. Andrew touched on that, but the existing roadway between Nancy and Garrison is 20 foot wide. The right-of-way is only 30 feet wide. This facility, the road today is between two water bodies. We got wetlands, we got permitting concerns, we have just not space there to do a facility that has been envisioned in the inner loop. That is the case for the segment also between Garrison and Valley View Road. Again, very narrow section of roadway, only room for a 6-foot concrete sidewalk on the back. We can't provide anything wider there because of, again, the water features, steep slopes, and the adjacent business there on the north corner of Wooddale, on the south corner of Wooddale and Valley View. So there's been a lot of discussions about notifying residents of major impacts acutely impacted to their properties. I wanted to show the plans for Concord Avenue and discuss what we are doing. These are the construction plans with the 8-foot trail, and in this location, a 3-foot boulevard. So where I put the green arrows is the right-of-way line. It's a 60-foot right-of-way. That's where the city has rights to do what they need. There's private utilities behind the street that they have rights to be in that space. So the green arrows are the existing right-of-way. Anything in gray is driveways. These are gray driveways. And then the blue is where the existing street is. So our concept with the existing is 30 feet. We're going just a couple feet wider on each side. It's not a major change. And the benefit of this roadway is most of the trees are backed by the right-of-way line. So a lot of the comments you heard is you're taking all the trees. We are not. There's one tree that's going to be removed on Concord Avenue. I circled it there in orange, and that tree is dead. We're doing that as a benefit because it's a dead tree. We have 11 other trees within the neighborhood that need to come out, and it's because they're growing around water shutoff valves that we need to replace as part of the water system improvements, and we're working with those owners and residents as we work through it. Again, I wanted to show there's one other area that we're working with a resident at 6208, circled there, and the picture shows an old block wall that's starting to lean. If we're going to be there, now's the time to fix it, make it last a long time. So we've been emailing, this person emailed us, phone calls. We're not sending a letter because we're working directly with this person already. And that may impact those trees, it may not. So we're trying to figure out what to do with that existing wall. But again, you can see all the improvements are within the right-of-way, and there's no other tree impacts along the entirety of Concord Avenue. So I just wanted to mention that at a project level of what the impacts are today with what we designed and went out for bid with. So the petition, so now on the top here is the proposed conditions that's been approved. 24-foot wide street, 8-foot wide concrete sidewalk, shared use path. On the bottom is what the petition is asking for. They're asking for that same 24-foot wide street, but if a sidewalk is required by the council, put it 5 feet right on the back of curb. We don't do 5 feet right on the back of curb. Our minimum is 6 feet. We want 5-foot minimum for the users and then a 1-foot warning strip for ADA requirements, so we notify people if they have vision impairments. They're going to feel a different concrete pattern before they step off a 6-inch curb into the street. So if you direct us to do it on the back, we would suggest a 6-foot minimum. It also helps our maintenance crews if you direct staff at a future time to maintain the sidewalk. Our plows are 5 foot wide. They need a little flexibility. If it's the middle of a snowstorm, they can't see what they're doing, they'll fall off the curb, and it just creates this nightmare of on and off the curb. So that 1 foot is both for ADA and for maintenance operations if you choose to require us to maintain it in the future. We would more, if you choose to direct us not to put in that 8-foot wide, we would prefer our standard sidewalk facility, which is 5 feet wide with a 5-foot boulevard. That provides snow storage for both the owners and city forces. It's a buffer from the vehicles. It helps our stormwater management, our stormwater permitting on this project. And that's really industry standards, is that 5 and 5, which we do all over the city. And again, if you direct us to do this, this does not satisfy the bike and ped master plan, the inner loop ideas, or what the ETC has been mentioning.
Is 5 plus 5 what you have over on, oh, sorry. Is
No,
5,
that's it. That was
is
my
5 plus 5 what you have over on Valley View?
Which portion of Valley View?
So if you go just across the street from Concord here, I mean, as you go head towards the community
Oh,
center.
in front of the new apartments there and stuff?
No. Well, single family homes. on Valley View heading west and then curving to go towards the community center.
I believe that sidewalk is, most of it is 6 feet on back of curb, might transition to.
No, it's 5 plus 5.
Most of the time, it's easy to tell. We'll have Andrew look that up on Google Maps, and I can continue, and we can come back
I
to
just
that
want
question.
to verify that that's 5 plus 5. I just
looks like
drove
5
over and
and
looked at it today.
It looks like it, yep. We're looking at
We're
looking at Google Maps. He just measured it. It's 5 and 5.
Okay, and then what's north of Valley View on Concord is 6 feet, 5 plus 1 for the strip.
Correct.
Between Valley View and the school.
Yep, that's 6 feet right on the back.
Okay.
In different context.
Remember Pierce.
I just didn't understand your graphic. I was trying to do the math, and if you pull it back up.
Which?
The one
I don't have control of it. Okay.
That one. So the top was the 8 foot.
So that's what's proposed. So that's 32 feet to 35 feet, depending if there's a boulevard. The bottom is 24 plus 10, so 34 feet total. The only difference is instead of 8-foot sidewalk, we're doing a 5-foot sidewalk, and now we have room for, in many locations, a 5-foot grass boulevard. So the street portion stays the same. We'll talk about that next.
Okay, that's what's confusing me. When I'm looking at the numbers, I don't know where the other 5 is coming from.
Okay, up here it's 8.
Yep.
We're shrinking that to 5 and adding 2 more feet to say 5 and 5 is our standard, just like the mayor referenced on Valley View Road to the west.
Okay.
If that makes sense. Okay?
And if you went to 5 and 5, you still wouldn't have any tree issues.
And if we would adjust the sidewalk to miss those ones. So that's what we're doing. But we don't, right now there's no impacts with this layout. A couple extra feet, we don't see impacts. But if there is, that's where we would, you see that all over where we meander around trees or we talk to the owners to see what their thoughts are. Maybe it's an ash tree that there's a benefit to take it out because it's probably going to have the emerald ash borer anyway. So those are the discussions we have with the owners.
Okay. All right, go ahead.
So the other item in numbers 1 and 2 was to maintain the facility. So staff on our work plan this year is to develop a sidewalk maintenance policy, bring that in front of council and discuss what those impacts would be of either continuing with our current practice of maintaining state aid and active routes to school sidewalks, or if we take on more. That analysis will look at how many machines we need, how many employees we need to operate them, and then what's the level of service that the council is expecting. Right now, we're trying to do all sidewalks within 2 days of an event. We have 5 plows, 5 individuals, and they're able to do that. If we keep adding to it, we maintain 70 miles of sidewalks today, and there's 25 that we don't maintain. Some of those are too narrow for us to maintain. The country club has 4-foot sidewalks. We've had this discussion before. So we would recommend we wait, have that discussion with the council, and at that point, you can direct us either tonight if you wish, or when you have the big picture of what that means from a city organization, you can direct us to add this one to maintenance operations or not. But we feel we should have a bigger, broader discussion on that topic.
It sounded like from your memorandum that deferring on that issue of who maintains the sidewalk is something you'd be comfortable with.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
we can defer to future conversations, and then you would have that ultimate decision later on, after we both understand the big picture.
Yes. Oh, I was kind of watching and I missed the hand pop. Member Risser, thank you. Member Agnew.
Yeah, actually there are other issues that the neighbors have brought up, including concerns about safety and fire code.
Yeah, we're not
And
done. Sorry, Member Risser, I'm not done with my presentation yet.
Okay,
So
so
I'll
you're
get,
going to get
if you want to interrupt you, but we'll get there. Yep.
But one comment, when you discovered that you could not do this path on Wooddale, to decide to just move it to Concord, that's kind of a big shift. And I understand the motivation for it, but at the same time, that was a switch in plans. And I feel like when that happened, there really needed to be more transparent communication. And so I think that's part of the frustration. The other thing is I understand the software has limitations, but it is really confusing because people see the word sidewalk and they think that's for pedestrians. And I know in Edina and also in the state of Minnesota, if you're on a bike, you can be on the sidewalk. But what we're proposing is very different from just keeping this, status quo idea about a sidewalk. by making an 8-foot wide shared use path. It's not simply saying bikes can go there. It's really inviting and encouraging bikes to go there. So I want to get that out early on in the conversation.
Okay, thank you, Member Risser. The last two items in the petition confirm whether one-sided parking is necessary, and if so, consider the east side of Concord. So staff feels one-sided parking is necessary. People like to have a little access to parking in the front of the street when they have people over. We're offering to move that to the east side per the request, and also to comments we've received from the fire department that are different from our initial reviews of this project. And then 4, for the sake of due process, direct staff to share design plans. We've shared the bidding documents with the neighbors. We are in the process of sending letters out. We've already had communications verbally and in person and emails and phone calls with impacted people. Like I said, there's very little impacts out here outside of the right-of-way. We would recommend not halting construction because we have very good prices. We have a contractor that's ready to go. And again, this is a very small portion of this project. So with that, I would just offer to go through and have any additional questions one by one down these 4 specific items, and then get council feedback at that time. So we'll be happy to stand for any questions.
Yeah, let's go to council member questions. I just want one of our fellow residents in the audience raised his hand, and I just wanted to make sure that he understood this isn't a public hearing, and we can't turn it into a de facto public hearing and have some people testify and some people that might want to testify not know that people are going to be allowed to testify. So it gets to be kind of awkward. You just can't do it in the absence of a advertised public hearing. So we'll have to keep the council discussion here and council members only, along with staff, as we wrestle through these different ideas, both from your neighborhood and also from staff. So council members, Council Member Agnew, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So if we could go back a few slides, and I think that this is the one that Member Pierce was talking about. Thank you. This is exactly what I was working on. So I want to make sure that I understood your answer back to Member Pierce's statement. I think the confusion that I'm seeing is if you add up all of the totals on the top and compare that to adding up all the totals on the bottom, you come up with 2 extra feet when you're on the bottom. Correct. And so are those extra feet coming from the yards, or where are those extra feet coming from an overall construction perspective?
Yes, those would be within the right-of-way. You know, on this map, we have 60 feet to make decisions of city purpose. That's from your guidance. So within these green arrows, we have 60 feet. The original plans had 8 and 24, that's 32. But on this plan right here, it's actually 8. It didn't show it on the graphic, 8, 3, and 24. So we were actually at 35 with what you're seeing on this graph. So the concept here is actually narrower, 1 foot narrower than what I just showed on those bidding documents. So we put a boulevard in portions of that street at 3 feet. So it's actually 1 foot narrower with this 5 and 5 concept.
Okay, and so kind of then I'm guessing our standard practice is because the 13.5-foot planting strip and the 14.5-foot planting strip, those are consistent. Is that just kind of the standard with which we go back?
Yeah, don't look at the planting strip numbers. Those are just fake numbers we had to put in to make the graphic populate. We try to balance impact. So if the curb's here and the curb's here, we try to say if we're going to do 2 feet, let's split the impacts 1 foot on each side and try to keep those impacts consistent for each side of the street within the total width of the improvements, the road and the sidewalk. And that's what I was showing. I'll go back here. With the blue arrows, you can see a little bit additional space on each side in the green space, which is city right-of-way. So we were trying to impact those. Now, if there's some big trees or walls, we'll adjust. So it's not in all cases, but that's our first blush through.
Okay, and maybe we can take this offline too, but I think from just a process perspective, there could be some opportunity to whether it's using paint or not like real paint, but like the paint application.
Yes, we understand. We got to be more careful with labels.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
I'm going to go to Member Risser. You've got your hand back up.
Yes, and this has to do with fire code again, because my understanding of reading all the material that the residents gathered was the reason for moving the parking to the side of the street that doesn't have the sidewalk is because the sidewalk will have to function in essence, as an extension of the street. Is that true?
The concern, yes, the concern, you had those comments from the fire department. They want access for outriggers, and that sidewalk would provide that access if they need it outside of the roadway. Yep.
And my understanding was it needed to be a sidewalk that met up with the curb. It could not be a sidewalk that had a boulevard. If you've got a boulevard, you can have trees growing in the boulevards, you can have shrubbery, you can have all kinds of stuff, and that could be a deterrent for the equipment.
Yeah, it's the
How does the boulevard factor in, and does the boulevard undermine the requirements?
We will clarify with that with the fire department, but just like today, if there's a tree, they'll drive 5 feet further. It's really the outriggers of their ladder truck. That's the only piece. It's those arms that go out. They just need a flat, permanent pavement structure to support the outriggers. So we can confirm that with our fire department.
Okay, so there's ambiguity there, because I thought when I read the material, it really needed to be the sidewalk flush up against the curb.
And if they require that, we would do that here, and we would say then do the 6 foot right on the back. But the fire chief is out this week, so we couldn't get confirmation. We've got a difference of opinions in just the last 2 days from the same staff members. We got feedback on this project through the fall and up to this point. So there's some discrepancies. We need the fire chief to clarify for both groups, and we're going to start that process as soon as he gets back next week.
Well, we need to know if this is to code or not before we vote on it.
And I'm saying if this is the code, well, first council has to tell me whether you want 8 feet or 5 or a narrower facility. If you direct us to do a narrow facility, then we'd ask for a preference. And if the fire chief says we can't do 5 and 5, we would do 6 foot on the back. So I would hope we can leave that open-ended, and we would respond and meet the code as the fire chief suggests. And we could definitely notify the council and the neighborhood on that final decision. But tonight,
Okay,
I guess the
another
first question
concern-
is, well, are we doing an 8 foot or not?
Right, and I normally, when it's a sidewalk, if it's not, putting in shared use adds another element to it. And normally I am for the widest sidewalks we can get. However, we were talking about a stretch where we're on a hill. This is very different than the Wooddale scenario where there was going to be an 8 foot wide shared use path, because we are going down in front of a lot of driveways. It's harder for people to see bikers coming down really fast when they're backing out. So there's a safety concern, and I've heard that from the residents. Also, thinking about that as a pedestrian pathway and how it's connecting up to Concord north of Valley View, just thinking about consistency, I think there would be a logic in sticking to the 6 foot wide sidewalk. The other thing is we've got clear signage along Valley View. We're going to have it down Wooddale with the Sharrow, and it just seems like it would be really logical to encourage bikers, experienced bikers who are comfortable biking in the street, to go in the street. And I'm not just thinking of the steep hill on Concord where people build up speed, but I'm also thinking how we approved the ramp coming off of the bridge. And you're going to have people who are walking up the ramp, coming toward it, people of all different abilities. You're going to have bikers, and I think it would really be a good safety measure to make it very clear that bike pathway is in the street. And we've heard that residents along 64th really view that street as not a very busy street. And so, I don't see any reason to move away from that, and it would be consistent with what's coming down Wooddale. If we end up making this shared use 8 foot wide pathway, we're mixing it up, like you're on the sidewalk, no, you're in the street. And it just seems like this is not necessarily a very safe plan. So I am very concerned about that. And I am concerned that it seems like in a way it was sort of a spur of the moment, okay, we can't do this on Wooddale, let's do it on Concord. And I think, when things get changed, we need to pause and really talk about what the significance of a change is. And this isn't, this keeps kind of happening. There's a narrative that's out there. People assume, messaging goes out. They see that it's a sidewalk, but then, oh no, it's something else. And it's very different. And I do think the residents have legitimate concerns about fire code as well as safety.
Member Risser, thanks for those comments. I'm going to do a quick polling here to see if any of your colleagues favor an 8-foot wide shared use pathway. You favor one? Okay. You do too? Oh, okay. All right, let's continue the conversation on that issue. Councilmember Jackson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So your presentation prompted just how things work. Tell me, with the 8-foot sidewalk, if you need 5-foot boulevard to shovel the 5-foot sidewalk, where does the snow go for the 8-foot sidewalk?
Yeah, all the snow's going in towards the houses. We don't have any space basically to support any snow between the street and that facility.
Okay, so you do the whole 8 feet.
Everything goes.
Okay.
And in this case, the maintenance is the resident. So city plows will push it. I mean, we deal with this whenever we put new sidewalks in, right? They might today go south and push most of the stuff to the west. Maybe they're going to flip operations to make it easier for the residents and push it on the east side. Maybe they're going to split it. So that first winter is a learning experience for both Public Works and the residents. We try to get it off the sidewalk as much as possible if we can, but right now maintenance operations is with the residents.
Okay, thank you. So I remember when we looked at north on Blake Road, going north on the shared sidewalk, there were a lot of historic trees there. Can you kind of talk a little bit about the care that was taken to protect those trees and how successful you were?
Yeah, different designated street. That's a municipal state aid street, so different standards that we have to meet. But we did a wide sidewalk. It's a shared use trail. People can bike, they can walk, they can take their dogs on it. People can interact on it. There we had some old growth trees that we limited the width of that sidewalk facility. We started at 10 feet at the lake, at Mirror Lake, and as we went up, we had some areas with boulevards and some without boulevards. Prior to construction, we hired a firm that does an air spade. They can blow air and show where the tree roots are so we can move and gently move those and then build that sidewalk through there. So that's what we did on the Blake Road project, is both narrowed facilities to protect trees, but also used a tool called an air spade to identify where the roots were and tried to move and adjust to stay out of those, and worked with our city forester the whole time to see what he would approve with those tree roots.
And will you take similar type of protections here of the trees, or how are we going to care for the trees when we're doing this construction?
We will. We don't see nearly the impacts that we do on Blake Road. We got
Okay.
12 trees that are in mostly water services. We have one dead one on this street, but yeah, we don't have anything as nearly as close as what we had on Blake Road. But if we do, we're going to use the same standard of care and remove and adjust as necessary.
Okay.
Because again, other than Concord, there's no other sidewalks going in on the street, so the actual streets are narrowing on the whole rest of the project. So those impacts to tree roots are minimal, except for the water system improvements.
Okay, thank you. And I want to talk a little bit more about Wooddale, especially between the two lakes, where it's just the sidewalk that goes between there. Tell me a little bit about the engineering that would be required to make a wider path there. It seems to me, yeah, and then all the way south of where you've got it green there.
Yeah, great question.
And also the impact of climate change. So it's a problem now, but will it get worse as we get more water in the area?
Correct, right? The lakes and the ponds here are a concern. We'd have to go through lots of permitting processes. We'd probably have to do something we did on Blake Road and sheet pile into the lake to provide space to make this portion of the trail wider to meet that need. We're doing a landscape restoration project right now in that corridor, so we would lose the work that's been done. In this corridor that's green, there's just not right-of-way there. We would have to get permission from adjacent property owners, get easements. There's some trees there we don't want to touch, and it just doesn't fit. It's just too narrow. And same thing with that section up here. Again, between water, groundwater, surface water, steep slopes. There's a business that has the building very close with stairs. We would be impacting a lot of infrastructure there that's right on that edge of the right-of-way. And both sections, it's very narrow. So I always say from engineering, we can engineer anything, but here it just doesn't make sense to try to fit something in there and still have to have a street that supports cars and all the other operations that a street needs to support. So it's just too narrow. It comes down to too narrow, water, and steep slopes.
So, Mr. Scipione, when you talked with the ETC, with the Energy, or the Transportation Commission, tell me what their reaction was to hearing about this, and particularly the change from Wooddale to Concord.
So thanks for the question, Member Jackson. The Transportation Commission didn't issue any official recommendations, but looking at reviewing the minutes from that meeting, what they said was they support boulevards on all of the proposed pedestrian facilities, and they actually think they actually thought in general that it was a big opportunity to provide a pedestrian and bicycle facility on the frontage road, particularly when you think about the Roslyn pedestrian bridge being right there and it being reconstructed, hopefully in the near future, to something that is ADA compliant. And they also felt that the facility on Concord Avenue made sense given the connection to the schools to the north, that it's a direct line, and the presence of the pedestrian activated flasher at the intersection of Concord and Valley View makes it a much safer crossing point than the other intersections, Ashcroft or St. John's, for example. They did also have a comment supporting that the city maintain that facility on Concord. But overall, they were supportive of this facility. And as noted in their advisory communication as well, they highlighted the fact that they see this as a community asset.
Okay, and so just to be perfectly clear, because you mentioned boulevards on Concord, they recommended the 8-foot shared use sidewalk.
They were supportive of the facility as presented by staff, yes.
Okay. So when I was at National League of Cities, someone raised a point that I thought was perfect, and that is you have to vision what your city's going to look like in 100 years. So it's not just today, it's not just next year, it's what are the next generations going to be seeing. And so I love the shared use path, or the two loops, the inner loop and the outer loop, and I think I'm a super strong supporter of that. My kids couldn't ride their bikes to school in Edina. It was too dangerous. And the idea that every kid should be able to walk or ride their bike to their local neighborhood school is paramount to me. That's just one of the most important things that I have. So, there was some talk about the neighborhood to the north, where Concord, the sidewalk on Concord is 6 feet. Have we done street reconstruction in that neighborhood yet in this overall plan that we're doing?
On Concord Avenue specifically, I don't
Yeah,
believe,
north of Valley View Road there.
I don't believe we have in the last 20 years. Concord is a state aid road, and that has typically a slower schedule than our local streets. But as this graphic shows, that Twin Loops facility is proposed to continue north on Concord and replace that existing sidewalk that's there. So we would look to implement that either with street reconstruction on Concord or as part of a standalone project funded by the Pedestrian and Cyclist Safety Fund.
Okay, so it is yet to come. So it's not done. We have a future path that's in the plans whenever we can figure out a way to fund it.
Correct. The total, all of the Twin Loops combined, excluding the 9 Mile Creek Regional Trail, I think is about 10 to 9 miles of shared use path. Of that, I would say less than a mile of it is currently constructed. Keep in mind, this plan was adopted in 2018, so we're about 6 years into implementation. So very early in the stages, but there are several segments of this facility that we have already constructed.
And the plan also anticipates that not everything that was drawn out at the time is going to work out the way that did on pencil and paper, that sometimes we're going to come across things like Wooddale where it just is not feasible. Is that correct?
Correct. The plan is intended to be a guide. It looks at the city from a 10,000 foot level. So at the time they proposed a shared use path on Wooddale, my guess is that they didn't look specifically to see what is the right of way here, and how, can we fit this facility in addition to the other uses that we have to provide here. So that's where, when we get into specific project implementation, that's where we look at what is actually feasible and how can we still achieve the goals of the plan if we can't implement what is specifically recommended.
Okay.
And what we learned in this process is we're going to try to preview projects a year sooner when it comes to the bike ped plan and this, so we can not notify people in the fall before construction like this happened on this case. But if we could look at and do a general review, a design quick to see where this facility and if they're going to fit on the desired plans for the bike ped plan, or are we going to shift them because of those impacts? And then we could improve the process of notifying neighborhoods and people better than we did this fall when we made that change this fall.
Terrific. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to Member Agnew because I'd like to have her also share her thoughts with us on why she prefers or likes the general notion of a 8-foot shared use pathway.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In a lot of ways, I echo what Councilmember Jackson outlined, and I think I go back to that same plan of the Twin Loops. And knowing how there was a strategic plan put in place by the city of how are we improving the overall infrastructure for bikes and pedestrians. And in an ideal world, this would be on Wooddale, right? Like that's what the plan had put in place. But there are also all these factors that we don't know. And in an ideal world, we should have known about this sooner. And I really appreciate the direction of let's tackle this even earlier next year so that we don't run into these types of issues. But I think as Councilmember Jackson mentioned, like there are always going to be nuances that we uncover as we go across these projects. And I do think that it's important that we can pivot. And with that, I think it's more important to me that we still have this shared use path within this overall loop because we're investing into this bridge. Like so much of what we're doing in this area is about pedestrians and connectivity across the city. And so because of that, I think it's really important to have this be a connected loop. And so then you kind of look at that's kind of my 10,000 square foot view. Then at the more micro level, we've obviously had a lot of amazing engagement from members of the community, and I know that that's why we're continuing to have this conversation today. But I also reflect back to a time prior to me being on the city council, but that's what the work that was done on 58th Street. And I remember, I don't have the specific numbers of how many were for or against it, but I do know that there were people along that street who did not want to see a sidewalk. And I just think, having been someone who lived right off of Halifax there and used it daily to get to the park, the impact on safety, the impact of having a pedestrian shared use path, that one, I don't know the exact foot length on that one, but an option to get to the park. And when I was thinking through this, I was like, well, 58th Street, it's a little bit more busy. Here we sometimes hear that this is a dead-end street, but it's not dead-end for pedestrians, right? We're revising, there's already a bridge there, but we're improving that bridge to better connect this area. And because of that, I feel like it's really important for us to continue that. And so then we also look at the plans and we see, okay, I want to have some type of either sidewalk or shared use. What are the two options? We have the 5+5, which I think is really the only option. I wouldn't want 5 right on the street, especially when you think about plows going by and just the ADA accessibility, all of that was mentioned. So I'm really comparing the 5+5 versus the 8. And I think and I think Member Risser kind of mentioned this, like bigger is better when we're talking about pedestrians. And I think about pushing the stroller and all of the engagement that I have on those shared use paths. So I would much prefer, if we're looking at 5+5 compared to 8, to have more options for the pedestrians and in a way, then you're cutting less into the street, the neighbor's lawn. And so yes, there's more sidewalk, more pavement in a way, but overall it's in their yard a foot less if we're pivoting back and forth, and don't quote me on that, but that's how I'm thinking about the actual differences. And so 5+5 versus 8, I would prefer the 8. So that's kind of my logic and reasoning, both at that higher level and then the lower level. And to just reiterate what I was saying where I said don't quote me, of course you can actually quote me, but what I meant was if we're talking about a 10-foot allowance for boulevard plus sidewalk versus an 8-foot allowance, there's a 2-foot difference there. And so I'm assuming that it would probably be 1 foot on each side that would actually be spread. So that's where I'm thinking it would be 1 foot less encroachment into existing lawns if we were to go with the shared use path.
I'll just correct one thing. In locations, it might be 1 foot more, because we're trying to still get a 3-foot boulevard in some cases with the shared use. I'll go back to the plan sheets. It's a little hard to see, but in this area, so most of Concord, we can do 8 and 3 grass. So council might say, just get rid of the 3 of the grass and just go 8 on the back. Now that limits impacts to the boulevards. That might address some of the concerns. And then as we get further here, where these trees and the wall, now we're down to just 8 feet right on the back here and here, because there's big walls and trees and stuff like that. So it varies a little bit. I just want to make sure it's not exactly set in stone. So.
And I appreciate that. And so, yes, there is some variability there. But I do want to just conclude that overall, I do think that the 8-foot shared use path, allowing for that continuity in our overall plan that we have for pedestrians is a primary goal for me.
I think we didn't speak to the users. You know, when we're looking at designing these things, we're looking at kids and families and those recreational users, the ones that are interested, but they're not going to take their bike out of the garage unless there's a place off the street to do that. You got people that bike, super bikers, whatever you want to call them, the top 10%. They're going to ride in the street no matter where we put any of this stuff. It doesn't matter. They'll be on every street. So we're really looking for families, people that are interested. And we want all the groups to be respectful of each other. Walkers, runners, bikers, people with dogs, strollers, just like the 9 Mile Creek Regional Trail. So that's our idea when we look at this twin loop, is we need respect from all users on this facility.
Member Pierce.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So I am definitely for the loop, inner outer loop, that connectivity. You don't need to flip to that. Okay. So I think in concept, I like that. I've always kind of struggled with the paths. And so I remember talking about this when we were doing Blake. I think an 8-foot path is more than what's needed. And so I from a safety perspective, and I appreciate the point that you just made, from a safety perspective, if I'm walking on a sidewalk, I actually want the cyclists to get on the street as quickly as possible, because I feel less comfortable if there could be people riding behind me. And so I just think about that, especially if someone kind of whizzes by, or you get the on your left, and then I have to step off or whatever. Once that happens, even though they're being respectful, I get nervous, especially if I have my headphones on and I can't hear them coming up. And so I actually would want to deter people from riding on the pathway. And I'm not sure how to do that, but my preference would be as soon as they come off of the pet bridge, once that's done, that there's clear markings. You're supposed to be in the street if you're cycling. And then your point about, well, I don't necessarily feel the same way if it's a 5-year-old kid riding a bike, right? That's different. So I get that. But I'm actually not nervous about the 5-year-old kid behind me. It is what did you call them? The super cyclists or whatever?
But they're going to be on the street.
The super cyclist is what I would be the most concerned with. And so having walked that area, I just feel like 8 feet is too much. And then I'd still get a little confused in the 5+5 or the 5+1. Because when you started, we did say 5, and then you talked about ADA compliance and adding the additional foot. So would that be considered 6 feet?
Yes, basically 6 feet right on the back of curb, if that's what you.
So that's not 5+5, that's 5+1.
Yep, and it's all concrete. That 1 foot just has different concrete joint patterns, so somebody with a cane can feel it before you step off.
Yeah, and so I do think for the ADA compliance piece, I feel like we got to do that. And so I understand how that implementation actually works. And one of my quotes from a book I read said that there's good policy is found in the margin. And what that means is when you try to focus on policy that is geared towards those who might be marginalized in some way, you typically end up with the policy that's better for everybody. And so if you're telling me the foot is for the ADA compliance piece, I'm gonna always be supportive of that. But in terms of 8 feet, I do think that's overkill in this area. And then your, pull up your the 4 asks.
Oh, from the petition.
No, we're not.
This one.
Yeah, this one. And so the number 4, and so Chad, I get I get confused on some of this. So I like to believe, and so I think there might be maybe process I don't understand. I would like to believe when projects come before us, like the neighborhood knows what's going to happen. Like they know it's, 8 feet, here's where it's going to be, here's what we're going to do with the trees, here's what the code is, here's how the fire code works. And as I look at this one, I don't feel that way. I feel like there's so much unknown, and I don't know why that's the case. And so you could say to me, well, that's the process, James. We figure things out as we go. Okay. So I'm not pushing on that. Sure. But what I am saying is that I do think we have to take a step back, and whatever the plan is that we agree that we're going to move forward with, we should clarify that with the neighborhood and say, all right, guys, here's what we're doing. And I've said this before, I've said this about other projects, people may not agree all the time with what we're recommending, but if we have reasons behind it that are logical and we articulate that to people, then I feel like I've done my due diligence. In this case, it just seems like not everybody's on the same page with what we're doing. And while I appreciate when a resident knows the fire code and can articulate that in an email, residents shouldn't have to do that, in my opinion. And so I think, for me, I think we do have to, for the sake of due process, take a step back. All right, here's what we're doing. Like it or not, I'll say it that way, but here's what we're doing. Make sure everybody's on the same page in order for us to move forward. I think it'd be difficult if we didn't do that. I would, and in terms of, I think I hit that one, in terms of the pathway, I would be for the 5, and I get the +1. Had you not mentioned the +1, I would have said 5, but I totally understand the +1 from that perspective. Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, and I would offer whatever the council decides tonight, we'll continue to use the Better Together website,
Sure.
get the information out. Definitely, that's definitely.
If I could just address a couple, 2 points. The point about the 8-foot width, where that comes from. So there's two reasons. One is it's generally an industry standard minimum width for a shared use, a two-way shared use facility like this. When you get to higher uses like the 9 Mile Creek Regional Trail or other facilities that Three Rivers provides, you generally see 10, 12 feet. But 8 foot is kind of the minimum. Part of where that comes from is from ADA, thinking about the minimum width for an accessible pedestrian route is 4 feet. So if you're providing a facility that is intended for two-way traffic, at a minimum you need to provide 4 feet in each direction or 8 feet. The second point about preferring cyclists to be in the street, looking at one of our engagement questions from the pedestrian and bicycle master plan. There's a question about what keeps you from riding your bike more, and the number one response with over 60% of respondents is that I feel unsafe around motor vehicles. And I feel like that really helps exemplify that, like Chad said, the users that we're designing for, by and large, are families. They're not the super cyclists. They're people that are using the facility for everyday uses to get to school, to get to parks, or just for general recreational purposes.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I would just say that over the time that you've been in the city manager's position, or city engineer's position, you've done a great job of communicating with residents, and I think our processes have gotten better and better over time. I would also say that despite our best efforts, for some reason we didn't reach all the residents and have everybody understand initially what we were going to be doing. So here we are. We approved a plan that had an 8-foot shared use pathway, and then people realized that, wait a minute, I don't know if we really understood what was happening here. So here we are. We're dealing with the issue, and that's a good thing. We're not saying we made a decision, that's it. We're willing to listen to all this input. That 8-foot shared use pathway, the material asphalt, is that what you?
No, the neighborhood wanted concrete, so we
okay.
switched that to concrete. So if we're thinking,
all right,
I heard Member Pierce mention 6 feet, 8 feet, we're only 2 feet wider. So we're pretty close to what we're recommending between the two. But concrete was what we heard from the neighborhood. We did switch that during the second meeting in December when you had initially approved this project.
Okay, so for me, I'd say it's good to have a plan. We got a master plan for sidewalks. This street had a sidewalk on it. One of the neighbors asked me, well, why didn't you have a sidewalk on Virginia when you redid that street? Well, it wasn't on the master plan to have a sidewalk on Virginia. So that's at least one explanation. And while it's good to have a plan, I mean, you said it yourself, it's a guide. It's not the 10 Commandments. And so we're trying to adjust a few things on the fly, including your request that we move the shared use pathway from Wooddale over to Concord. And I'm not in favor of it. I like the idea of separating people from traffic, whether it's bike traffic or car traffic, and I like sidewalks. And when I look at our options, I like the 5-foot and the 5-foot boulevard on Valley View. I think it makes the neighborhood look so much better. I'd prefer that here, as Member Pierce would. I don't know about Member Risser yet. We're going to give her a chance to talk in a minute about what she'd prefer. And then as a backup, I think we can make a decision tonight. If for some reason the fire marshal says, no, I got this issue, then we go to 5+1, which is what it's like north of Valley View and Concord.
Correct.
So either one of those I'm comfortable with. I like little kids on sidewalks. I don't like little kids on a shared use pathway with bikes. I think it's dangerous. I think it's extraordinarily dangerous. So for me, and especially when we get a new bridge, a bike ped bridge over the crosstown, and people are going to be using it more frequently. I think it's really careful. We have to be really careful about making sure we separate people from bike traffic and automobile traffic. It's not a well-used pathway for cars or roadway for cars. There's not much traffic there. So to me, putting the bikes on the street is the safest thing to do, and let dads and moms with kids that are having kids learn how to ride a bike use the sidewalk, because we allow biking on sidewalks in Edina, and that's the way they can go to school if they want. They can ride up the sidewalk all the way to the grade school. Parking on the east side, that's fine with me. I think it makes more sense, frankly, because of the topography. When I'm over there and met with the neighbors, I think they'll end up with some beautiful land and stone sections of wall on that west side, but where the sidewalk would go. But I think it makes more sense to have the parking on the east side. So for me personally, I prefer the 5+5 with the 5+1 as a backup. And then parking on the east side, and I prefer that we go forward and approve this project tonight and get it moving. I think the neighbors have indicated through their petition that either it's no facility, not a shared use pathway, or a 5-foot. So I think they're doing a great job communicating with the neighbors, the folks that have kind of seized the moment for the neighborhood, and you can see it from the petition, that they've been a really great communication. So I think to your point, I think we should try to keep this moving along tonight and approve it and keep moving. But that would be my preference, and we may be, I don't know if we'll be at loggerheads tonight, but I'm going to turn now to Member Risser and ask her what she's thinking about in terms of what she'd like to see over on Concord.
Thank you. And I agree that I think it's good to keep the bikes in the street and the kids who are walking and the pedestrians who are walking on the sidewalk. And normally I do like wider sidewalks, that 8-foot wide, but here I'm looking at the slope, and this is an area where I walk a lot, okay? This is my neighborhood. And so, just seeing how this is playing out with the bridge and the ramp and knowing how high-speed bikes can go. The other thing that's in the back of my mind is I grew up near Lake Harriet. I remember 1972 when a woman was killed because she was hit by a bicyclist and she was walking around Lake Harriet with her dog. And this was back when Lake Harriet only had one path that was shared by pedestrians and bikers. And I think, we do need to recognize that it's important, especially if you're going to have speed and you've got this hill on Concord. I worry about safety, and the residents were very clear about their concerns regarding safety. So, I like the idea of the 5-foot wide path and making it very clear this is a Sharrow, just like Wooddale. And let's get that marked on 64th as well as Concord. The person who would like to make sure that we're crossing all our T's and dotting all our I's is frustrated that we don't know whether we really need to have it be a 6-foot pathway right next to the curb. But fire code is important, and I agree entirely with Member Pierce that it shouldn't be on residents to find this out. So I'm in favor of the 5-foot wide path. I guess if it's a boulevard or not, but it's got to be fire code. So I guess I'd rather say let's play it safe and make sure that it's fire code because we're voting on it tonight.
Member Risser, what about parking? Are you comfortable with that on the east side?
I am, because of this situation and because it has to do with fire code. So yes.
Okay. Member Pierce, you had an add-on thought, I think, with regard to process.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. So your point 4, what I was referencing is that whatever we decide today, I think we should take a pause. But my pause was to summarize the project. And then we do have residents that happen to be in chambers tonight, but I think we should maybe have another community meeting to go through this is the project. That's all I meant. Yeah.
We do that when construction kicks off. So we needed to wait for an award of a contract. Letters are ready to go out, notifications to have a neighborhood meeting on site so they can meet our inspection staff. We can explain what's going on. They can meet the contractors, know their pickup truck colors, all that kind of stuff. So that happens with every construction. So that's going to happen. Okay. We do that every time. I think for me, I would need a little clarification. So I heard Member Risser and Member Pierce preferred the 6-foot right on the back of curb. That would for sure meet the fire code. We know that. And then the mayor had a little different opinion with the 5 and 5. So I don't know if there's any other conversation along those lines on the direction.
So what I was thinking was based on what you had said, and this is just, it's I guess function and aesthetics for me. When I look at Valley View, I like the 5-foot boulevard and the 5-foot sidewalk. I like the looks of it. I think it looks more neighborly. I think it's a lot more of a community look, if you will. But understanding that if there is an issue with the fire code, that we need as a backup the 5-foot plus the 1-foot strip, and I'm okay with that. But I just had a preference to the other thing. But if Member Risser and Member Pierce favor just going with the 5-foot plus the 1-foot aggregate, and I could be comfortable with that too, and then parking on the east side. So I don't know, Member Risser, what's your preference?
That is my preference.
So then I am just, for clarification then, what you talked about earlier was the 5 plus the 1, and the plus 1 was ADA compliant, so that if you are blind or visually impaired, you feel something different with your.
Correct.
So in the 5 and 5, how do we accomplish that?
They hit the grass.
So
They
the
hit
grass is that
so
strip.
they don't step
Okay.
off the boulevard.
And you
So-
got snow storage too, that was the other thing. I was
Snow
talking about.
storage.
You got snow storage.
So there's trade-offs. This is, you're seeing, right? Every project's got major trade-offs. I'm just hearing only
Got
one,
it.
just the mayor with the 5 and 5. So
Yeah.
I think,
No,
I'm hearing the 5
Yeah,
and 1.
I was the 5 plus 1 thinking about the ADA compliance, the different texture.
Sure.
So if the different texture is the grass, then I'm fine with the 5 plus 5. Is that what that is?
Well, then it'd be 5 and 5, but no matter what, we're gonna check in with the fire department next week when Chief Slama gets back. If he says we can't do the 5-foot boulevard for whatever reason, again, there's a couple new staff members that are interpreting code different than staff I've worked with for the last 12 years in the fire department. This has changed in the last 3 days is why this whole issue's come up. This street is what we've been building for nearly 20 years, so we gotta confirm this fire code issue. I just need to know one way or the other if 3 of the members support 5 and 5, and the fire chief says we can't do that, we'll do a 6-foot. So if they do a 6-foot, then we're for sure safe on the fire code question. But I see Assistant City Manager's got her finger up.
I'm getting mixed signals here.
Mr. Mayor, can I just ask one clarifying question of Chad? Do we have to make a decision tonight about the composition of the sidewalk to to go forward? Or could we wait until we have that clarification from the fire department and then have this discussion with council? Because I think there's a lot of questions about what fire's interpretation and how that impacts the plan.
I don't think we need to do that. I think we've got 3 people that are of a common view here, that 5 plus 1 is what we'll be comfortable with.
And if that's the case, we don't have to, but I would say we could wait till next time and just figure out the sidewalk.
I mean, we don't have 5 that are comfortable with that. We
No.
got 3. Member Agnew.
Thank you. I would place it in a stacked rank of 8 foot, which I think I'm hearing is off the table, and then a strong preference for the 5 plus 5. When you hear people having concerns about snow storage, the idea of plows having that be right up on the sidewalk and the impacts of that, especially if, snow removal would be up to those residents, I would be strongly for a 5 plus 5.
So I think I'll offer the solution that Assistant City Manager had mentioned. Award a contract tonight, we'll talk about that next. I'll come back at the next council meeting and we'll figure out the 5 and 5 or 5 and 1. It won't delay the major project. They need to do all these utility portions, all that stuff. And then we can just answer the fire code question, and this council can then vote on those 2 options with a 5-foot sidewalk. But I'll offer that to the council.
Okay, yeah, you offer that up. And then parking on the east side and no 8-foot shared use pathway.
We'll do the parking and the 8-foot's gone. We're gonna do a 5-footer. It's just a matter of, is it 1 foot or is it 5-foot ADA kind of strip in there, whether it's planted or not, and we can come back in 2 weeks with that answer.
How do council members feel about that? Dealing with that issue tonight or waiting and getting further information from Director Milner? You're okay waiting on that? So what do you need? What do you need from us tonight in a form of a motion or anything else? Because we already approved the project with an 8-foot shared use pathway.
Yeah. So then I would make a motion either here, responding to the petition, or with the award of the contract, saying award the contract but remove the 8-foot shared use path. We're going to go to a 5-foot with the boulevard to be determined in 2 weeks, and move the parking to the east side. That way the motion covers all the changes to the scope of the project. And then the only other remaining item is this maintenance question of, are we maintaining it now, or are you going to wait and have a discussion later this year on the maintenance? And if there's no action on maintenance, then we'll just assume we're having a discussion later, because that's the current.
Might be a chance for Member Pierce's notion to let the neighbors have a little weigh in on 5-1 or 5-5. I'll call it. So, but here, Member Jackson.
Word the thing. I'm not finished. I would like to make a comment before we wrap up. So if you want to word out, then the motion's going to go, but I
Okay, thanks for that. So the motion would be to remove the 8-foot shared use pathway from the project,
Correct.
and then what?
And move parking to the east side.
Move parking to the east.
And then have staff come back in 2 weeks.
Okay.
Have staff come back.
Before we have someone make that motion, I'm going to turn back to Member Jackson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So my experience is I walk around, well, I think it's Vernon, where Vernon and Gleason split and you head back towards United Healthcare. And I'm always having to step off the sidewalk in order to let somebody else pass. The whole idea of the twin loops was to have an alternative form of transportation that was not cars. If that is, and that's so kids can ride their bikes to go see their friends and not have to worry about traffic. And if you're going to have a 5-foot sidewalk, that means someone's always going to be hopping off the sidewalk. Especially if you have a couple out walking side by side, someone has to hop off the sidewalk when you pass somebody. This is an we were just upstairs talking about the Southdale guidelines. The whole idea of the Southdale guidelines is alternative transportation methods. That's what the twin loops are. This seems like a sleepy little street, and I appreciate all the hard work that the neighbors had. It's a sleepy little street. But in the future, we want people out of their cars safely, especially children, and to be able to ride your bike to the pool safely and know that you're not going to have to push somebody off the sidewalk because kids can go like this and stuff. To me, this is a loss. If we step back on the idea of the twin loops, this is a major step backwards for our city, our walkability, our safe bikes for kids, and I'm deeply disappointed if that's where we're going tonight. I will support the motion because I want to move forward and I want to appreciate the work that's been done, but this is a big step backwards for us as a city and for alternative forms of getting around, and I'm really disappointed.
Other comments? Okay. The motion would be to remove the 8-foot shared use pathway from the project, the Concord A and B project, B and C projects, excuse me, B and C project. Move the parking to the east side of Concord, south of Valley View, and secure further information from staff with regard to sidewalk possibilities at some future date with resident input.
Well, we're just looking at the fire code issue. That's what we.
All right, we'll bring it back to you. Bring it back to us because we got to make a decision.
Yeah, we'll bring back to you with the fire code.
Secure further information for the council to make a decision on.
Correct.
On the sidewalk.
Yep.
The configuration of the sidewalk. I'll put it that way.
Correct.
Pardon me. Oh, Julie. Sorry, Member Risser.
Okay. The other issue is the maintenance, and this is, part of a pathway that is going to be cleared by the city. It would just be the city ignoring 2 blocks. And I mean, the city plows north of Valley View. It's going to clear 64th. It's going to clear the bridge. It's going to clear, all the way around. So to not include this section, I think, is a mistake. Particularly if we want to make sure that kids know they can walk on this to get to school, and it will be clear and it will be consistent, and we're not just ignoring 2 blocks. I think that's the problem.
Well, I think that's one thing that we're going to defer on and make a decision at a later time on the extent of maintenance. Is that what you're primarily concerned about? It's a little bit hard.
I was kind of hoping we could do it tonight, but I really do want to think that there's so much logic to making sure that part is cleared along with the rest of the pathway. It doesn't make sense not to do those 2 blocks.
Yeah, I think the staff's saying that, suggesting early on that this is something that they're looking at, to the point you're making that they do 75 miles of maintenance now, 25 miles maintained by residents, and they're looking at whether or not it makes sense to have a broader sort of strategy on that. And so if you're comfortable, we can defer on that until we get some more input from staff on the pros and cons of that issue, but I think we all are sensitive to that issue of who should maintain the sidewalk.
Okay, and it is a pathway to school, so I think that's
Yep.
really important. Thank you.
Yes, Member Agnew.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do think that it is important for us to consider not making a decision on maintenance tonight. I do agree with pushing that off, but I would just say that it feels a lot easier to support maintaining a shared use path than it does a 5-foot sidewalk. Because I don't want to start supporting maintaining all 5-foot sidewalks across the city. And I do want to say that I think it's important for us to get the fire chief's sign off on whatever plan we're moving forward with. But at the same time, this sidewalk isn't just for the people that live on this street. Sidewalks are meant to connect the entirety of the community. And so I think it's important not just to rely on, while it's important, and their voices definitely matter, they're not the only voices at the table in terms of what is the makeup of our sidewalks. So I just want to say that at this point, I feel that we've received a lot of input, and the outstanding component for me is what is required by fire code.
Okay. Member Jackson, further comment?
Yeah, when it comes to the maintenance thing, I think if the city were to maintain it, then it's an aesthetic thing for the neighbors. I mean, it's the difference of a few feet. And so, I mean, I am in favor of having the city maintain the twin loops. So to me, I don't want to have to vote on this because, you know, we're going to do something. We've got the bid, we're going to vote for it. But if the 8-foot sidewalk is maintained, then it's just, we don't want a sidewalk. So I would vote for the 8-foot sidewalk with maintenance tonight. And I think that would alleviate the biggest problem, and that's having to shovel an 8-foot sidewalk. And I know there are other concerns, but anyways, so it's like lose, lose, lose for me tonight, so.
All right, is there a motion to remove the 8-foot shared use pathway from the Concord B&C project, move parking to the east side of Concord south of Valley View, and direct staff to provide the council with further information on fire code requirements for the sidewalk that we've discussed this evening? Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Member Pierce moves. Member Risser?
Second.
All right. Further discussion? Member Jackson?
Nay.
Member Pierce?
Aye.
Member Agnew?
Nay.
Member Risser?
Aye.
Mayor, aye. Motion carries. Motion's approved. Okay. Thank you for that part of it. Now we're on to phase 2. They're just approving the project. And I'll go back to Director Milner to approve the request for purchase for the Concord B&C Neighborhood Roadway Reconstruction Project.
Yeah, so just to follow up, we knew we couldn't award the contract on consent because of this discussion. So we're just looking for you to approve the request for purchase for this neighborhood recon, $7.3 million to bituminous roadways. When we looked at assessments in December, our estimates had it at $13,400. With the low bid, it's estimated at $11,800. So we saw an improvement just with the bids. That's why we really don't want to delay, because we got some great bids. So we're just looking for a motion to approve this request for purchase here tonight and have the contractor get started, and we'll come back with those other discussions from the previous item.
So moved.
All right, you got a second?
Second.
All right, we've got a motion and a second to approve the request for purchase for Concord B&C Neighborhood Roadway Reconstruction Project with Bituminous Roadways, Inc., that's the name of the company, for $7,330,420. Simple majority roll call vote. Any further discussion on the motion as stated? Member Jackson?
Aye.
Member Agnew?
Aye.
Member Pierce?
Aye.
Member Risser?
Aye.
Mayor? Aye. Unanimous. Project's approved for entering into a contract with Bituminous Roadways for $7,330,420 to get this project done. Folks, thanks for your input and your continuing interest in coming and helping guide us through this situation. And see you again, I guess, when we talk about sidewalks. All right. That's it for the main part of the agenda, I think. And we're going to now turn to manager's comments.
Yeah, we just have one item tonight, which is that we need to select a council member to participate in the student board and commission process. In the past, Councilmember Jackson has participated, but we need to select one of you to join that process.
All right. No question?
I'm happy to do it again. I love it, but anybody else wants to do it, I will be happy to hand it over.
And then who is Seidman still here? Jan Seidman, or is she
No,
gone?
Jan Seidman has moved out of town, so I was thinking maybe Lori Richmond, who's helped us with the adult commissioners before.
All right. That's a great volunteer. All right. Put our blessing on
I
her
would love to do
volunteerism.
it, but I'm sure you're an expert at it. I couldn't take that away from you.
I'm happy to
You
share.
can come and help. Come and share. All right. Well, you've got Councilmember Jackson, and I guess the rest of us can talk about where we can help out if possible. Okay, let's go to mayor and council comments. Member Risser, you want to go first?
Thank you. And Member Jackson, thank you for taking that on. I really appreciate it. April just started, and this is Distracted Driving Awareness Month. And so I just want to put a plug for that and really remind people when you're driving, just drive, just focus on the road. Put those cell phones where you can't be distracted by them. You know, turn it so you can set them so that they are not going to go off when you are driving. And so I just wanted to get that out. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'm going to go to Member Agnew.
Thank you. I don't think I have anything tonight. Thank you.
Member Pierce.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just a comment. I think today, if we include the working session and this council meeting, like we all kind of leaned into some tough conversations or challenges right before our city. And I felt like we did a really nice job of just sharing our opinions, expressing when we're disappointed. And I think for me, like I like to hear that because it does start to kind of sharpen, it helps to sharpen how I think about things. And so it may feel like we were supposed to be done like an hour ago or so, but it felt good to me. And so just thanks to the staff for teeing things up the way that they did, and then to my colleagues for making today happen. That's it.
Thank you, Member Pierce. Member Jackson?
Yes, so thank you, Mr. Mayor. On our consent agenda, we appointed some new election judges for our elections coming up, and I want to say thank you very much to everybody who signed up to be an election judge. And you know you're important to us, you're important to our community, and if you have not signed up to be an election judge and you have even a slight interest in it, please talk to our city clerk, Sharon Ellison, because we'll have more elections coming up, 5 in total this year. So thank you, everybody who signed up to do that.
Thank you, Member Jackson. We touched on the issue of housing affordability tonight with the ADU conversation. There's been a lot going on at the legislature as not only cities but state government and legislators are concerned about housing affordability. And what we've been doing is I've been spending quite a bit of time over at the legislature dealing with bills that really take away local control over land use. And I think we've got some of the bills in pretty good position. We've got one meeting tomorrow on one that would mandate multifamily housing in commercial industrial districts by preference or right, and then would eliminate any ability for a public hearing on an affordable housing project, and some other elements of it too that are difficult to deal with. I think if they would have dealt with heightened density and some incentive bonuses, it would have more closely aligned with what we're doing from a affordable housing policy standpoint. But nonetheless, it is what it is, and so we'll go over there and deal with that one tomorrow. There is a bill at the legislature around ADUs, and so what we talked about tonight, I think, would be relevant to what I provide for information to our neighbor representative Larry Kraft up in St. Louis Park, who has changed what's called House File 4009 to be pretty broad-reaching to just dealing with ADUs. So that's what I can tell you now. I'll let you know what kind of results we have after we meet with some of the legislators tomorrow. And that's it for me. And anybody else have anything? All right. Is there a motion to adjourn? Do we have to do this by roll call? I suppose we do. No?
Okay.
You can let us get away with it, huh? You don't need a motion. Oh, yeah, that's right. True.
But it's so much fun.
We've been doing that as a how to have it. And member Agnew moves the adjourn.
So moved.
Member Pierce, second.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and second that we adjourn the meeting of the Edina City Council this second day of April 2024. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adjournment say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. All right. Member Risser, be well. Get yourself healed up.
Thank you.
All right. We're adjourned.